And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Yo, Lord Willin, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pesci's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Delacroix and Gotti. I know wild nights, Havana nocturne. Light up a cigar and watch your spot burn. You'll get patty whacked, I'm tough like Irish dock workers. Run with guys, hooligans and block lurkers. Corner berserkers, street savvy soldiers. You better pay. Don't make me.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie, and hopefully today is a coronavirus-free day for everybody. I hope everybody is safe and sound and not sick with the fucking plague. That being said, we are going to do a large Q&A today, and then we're going to talk about some of the biggest mob hits that have ever taken place, because there's a lot of reason why mob hits take place. It's not always just on its face value, retribution, or about money. Sometimes it's very political, and we're going to talk about four. These four, by no stretch of the imagination, are not in any sort of order. They're at where they're at. So if I talk about one thing before another, doesn't make it necessarily more important or less important. And then next week, we're going to do another four along with a biography of what's going on. Now, also, I wanted to say one thing real quick. If you've been following along the last couple of weeks, we talked about Nicky Scarfo and something particular that I find amusing about him. If that's the case and you've been following along, then you're totally going to understand when we do take our first break, which is probably about 8 minutes from now. You're going to understand the joke. It's a fucking joke, and before people fucking make claims and say wild shit, it's a fucking joke. That's it. We got to laugh in these times. So that being said, I wanted to get to two things before we do take a break and come back and start the show. First of all, you can follow us on Facebook, type in Mob Talk Radio, give us a like, send a threat, do whatever you want to do, but that's where you're going to find the most information. As well, if you want to contribute a question to the Q&A, which I get hundreds and hundreds a week, I can't get to all of them, but if you want to submit a question, you could do it that way. There's usually a post on Monday. You can submit your question there, or you can direct message me. The first thing we're going to talk about today is some Frank Locascio news, and the reason why we are is this is still fucking ongoing, but if you don't know what I'm talking about, Frank Locascio, who served with John Gotti, is now 86, and he would like to get the fuck out of prison. While we don't want anybody to be that age in prison, reality is that it is what it is. So, more or less, what Frankie's argument position would be in this particular case is that he was charged with the murder of Louis DeBono, who he alleges basically he had nothing to do with it. He tried to talk John Gotti out of it, this, that, and the third. He's not complicit. You take away that murder, I still think Frankie gets a ton of time. I still don't think he gets out, but it is what it is. And where we're at with this right now is there's a lot of court paperwork being handed in left and right. And now Sammy the Bull Gravano is trying to help Frank Locascio get out of prison. Like I said, the murder indictment in that charge itself basically lays claim that Locascio, conspired to kill Louis DeBono. Frankie was basically, and if you've ever heard the wiretaps, you're going to know what I'm talking about, but Frankie Loc was in a meeting with fucking John Gotti, and John Gotti was boasting about killing Louis DeBono, or getting ready to kill him at least. I'm not sure specifically in that fucking time frame if Gotti had killed him or was going to kill him, but either way it was going to happen. So Locaccio's stance is that he tried talking John Gotti out of it, but the result, at least according to Gravano, was that Locascio was demoted in rank over the issue. So Locascio spoke out against it. Gotti said, well, fuck you. You're not going to follow protocol, so I'm going to bump you down a couple notches. This is what Gravano says. Gravano also has stated that Locascio had no involvement with the murder or the planning or the conspiracy of DeBono. And over the years, Locascio has continued to deny those charges. The problem with that argument is that, Gotti boasted about it. And in the federal government's eyes, this is a conspiracy, right? So if three people are getting in a car and somebody says, we're going to rob a bank, well, get the fuck out of the car if you don't want to be charged with it. That's how conspiracies work. So in the federal government's eyes, they feel like Frankie Locascio should have come forward and told them that this was going to happen. He should have saved Louis DeBono's life, and he did none of that. He basically heard what was going to happen and just, listen, you could say all day long, don't do it, but if somebody does it and you're sitting in that room and you don't go tell on them, they're going to charge you with it. That's just how it fucking works. And so Locascio had two options. He could have gone ahead and basically told DeBono, which would have created a lot of problems, would have gotten him killed. He could have ran to the feds, which would have made him a rat. Or he could have joined Team Federal Government and ratted everybody out, and that wouldn't have worked either. And over the last few months, Gravano specifically was asked why he didn't bother going to the federal government when he became a cooperator and tell them that Locascio had nothing to do with it. And his excuse is simply, well, nobody bothered to fucking ask me. So the idea here that Gravano all of a sudden has some sort of moral implication to set things right is a little more than laughable to me. And what will come to a shock to a lot of you who listen to my show is that I can't really defend Frankie Locascio in this situation, because once you join that life, once you get involved, murder conspiracies are going to come, conspiracy to do this, conspiracy to do that. So unless you fucking go run into the fucking feds, you're going to get charged. So I don't understand why Frankie Locascio is crying about this 25 years after the fact. And I don't blame the guy for being upset, but look, you join that life, you commit yourself to that life, you get charged, you get a ton of time, you just do your fucking time. And apparently he doesn't want to, and he's trying to employ the services of Sammy Gravano to help him out, but I don't think that's going to help either. But like I said, it's a fucking conspiracy, and when you get charged in a conspiracy, if you're in that car, and you knew about things happening, you did nothing to stop it in the eyes of the federal government by running to them and telling them, then you're just as complicit. So his argument isn't going to work. He's going to die in prison. That's the reality of it. This is one of those things, it's not like he's on his deathbed and he only got like a 20-year charge. There's a lot of different mitigating circumstances to this. But at the end of the day, I don't think that his defense really holds any water, unfortunately for him. All right, so the other thing I wanted to talk about, and I debated long and hard about really discussing this only because, people are going to hear this and they're going to take it any way they want. They're going to think I'm pretending to be a tough guy. They're going to think that I'm trying to be something I'm not, and that wasn't the case whatsoever. And basically, here's sort of, and I'm going to sort of scrimp on some of the details only because I don't want to get into the whole thing, but as everybody knows, I get a lot of threats from everybody. The internet tough guys are constantly showing, sending threats, saying they're going to do this, saying they're going to do that, and I ignore all of it. I don't invest my time into giving a fuck what people think, especially people that obviously are borderline morons, okay? So what had happened was somebody from South Philadelphia, and I'm not going to tell you his name because people are just going to, start shit. And his name isn't important because he's really fucking irrelevant. But somebody in South Philadelphia, not a connected person at all, just a fucking nickel and dime shitheel, took it upon himself to message me some pretty nasty shit. And normally I read it, I laugh, I bypass it. But the reason why he was attacking me wasn't because I talk about guys in Philly or because I talk about the Philadelphia Mafia or because people just don't like who I am. No. He attacks me because he says he's friends with Michael Francis. That's the first problem I had with it. Because if you don't like me because you don't like my mouth, you don't like my attitude, you don't like what I say, all right, I'll give you credit. You're fine. You can hate me. I don't give a fuck about that. But when you come at me because you're defending Michael Francis, who is a certifiable fucking informant, I don't know how many times I got to put out his fucking paperwork, but he's an informant. So you're attacking me from South Philly because, not because I'm a jerk off, but because you love Michael Francis, who you claim that you're friends with him, which we all know is a fucking lie. All right, that's the thing. And so this idiot made sort of the mistake of telling me his name and where he worked and told me if I ever had the fucking balls and I was in South Philly that he would set me straight on things. So I kind of let it go and laughed about it. This event, I'm not going to tell you when it took place. It wasn't like in the last week, wasn't in the last 2 weeks. But I was going to South Philadelphia for something else with 3 other people. What any of us were doing there, it was just normal day-to-day shit. And I told the people I was with about the situation. And of course, they're going to bust my balls for like an hour and a half on the way down to Philly about this. Oh, you're going to let this guy do this. You're going to let this guy do that. And it started to piss me off. And it pissed me off because it's like, I don't understand for the life of me why anybody would tell you where they work and that they're going to do X, Y, and Z to you. So after getting my balls busted for like an hour and 30 minutes, I finally said, fuck it, let's go to this employment place. And there was no intentions of doing anything other than seeing if somebody who's got a big mouth is willing to be a fucking man or if they're going to be a bitch. Because that's my philosophy. If you're going to sit online and you're going to say all these nasty fucking things, then you should at least be man enough to say it to my face. Not that I needed to prove a point, because I really don't. It's all nonsense and gossip and stupid drama that I don't fucking need. But after getting my balls busted about it, I'm going to admit I was a little pissed off about it. So I walked in with 3 of these guys, and I asked to see this person who was obviously a dishwashing piece of shit and fucking nothing, nobody. And he come in from the back, and the minute he sees my face, he runs out the back fucking door. That's your fucking man. That's your man right there. That's the tough guy with the big mouth. So I didn't go in there to like cause shit. I didn't go in there to start a fight. I went in there on the basic principle of people talk too much fucking shit. They think they're tough guys. Then when you show up, they're not so fucking tough. And that's the reality of it. And that's sort of the moral of the story here is it's not about me being tough. It's not about me exerting myself in any kind of way, acting a tough guy. Or it's nothing like that. It's the pure principle of if you're going to run your fucking mouth, eventually you're going to have to run it to somebody's face. And I've had experiences in my life where I have said things about people and it has come back to haunt me. I'm not saying I'm any better than anybody else, but this particular fucking idiot was very specific to me in a message mentioning names of people that I would assume he didn't think I knew or heard of, and that somehow that was going to mitigate me being a tough guy or me going and confronting him about his mouth and some of the shit he was saying. And that's my point. People, and it's not South Philly. I'm not stereotyping South Philly because it's all over the place. These people read about a guy's name, they lie, they say they know them, they say, oh, I got protection from this one and that one. And the problem with this particular individual was he mentioned somebody I do fucking know very well. And I thought it was amusing because I'm like, okay, well, we're going to find out real fucking quick how well this guy knows somebody, because if I go in and I start a problem with somebody, of course it's going to get back and I'm going to get a phone call. What the fuck are you doing? None of that happened. None of that happened. And if he was a tough guy by nature, he wouldn't have stood there like a fucking bitch and ran out the fucking back door. Ain't nobody was there to hurt him. I was just there to say, do you want to say to me what you said to me X, Y, and Z time ago? Now, I'm here. I'm in your fucking neighborhood. If you want to say what you want to say it to me. And we can have a discussion on what your problem is. He didn't have a problem with me because I said this about this guy or that guy or this guy or talked about the mob or anything like that. This is over Michael Francis. And so if this is the type of people that Michael Francis has in his life, that explains a lot to me. Bitches breed bitches, and that's the way it's going to be. But like I said, some people are going to hear this, and they're going to take it 90 degrees the other fucking direction, say, oh, look at him trying to be tough guy, want to be. It has nothing to do with that. It's the principle of if you have something to say it to me. There's 10,000 people on social media that do this shit every fucking day. They bark, they bark, they bark, and then the minute you stand in front of them, they got nothing to fucking say. Cowards fucking do that. You know, just like these guys, they send threats. Oh, I'm going to have you killed. I'm going to shoot you. Come shoot me. Come fucking shoot me. I want you to have the balls to come shoot me. Have the fucking balls. Don't fucking make a threat and then not back it up. And that's the thing with social media that I hate so fucking much. They will make fucking threats and they're not going to back them up. People that are going to hurt you aren't going to fucking send you a fax. By the way, in 25 minutes from now, I'm going to stick a cucumber up your ass. They're not going to do that. They just do it. Real men just do it. It's not about being tough. It's about having respect for yourself. Because the thing is that if you go in there and you approach a guy and you say, so I heard you wanted to say this, this, and this. Why don't you say it to me now? Well, when he runs out the fucking back door, now all of a sudden, one, he's not going to say it again. Two, he's going to know you're not a punk and you will step up and say something to him. Three, it's going to get around that you went and did it. And then people are going to be less apt to confront you over fucking nonsense. You're going to confront me over Michael Francis of all fucking pukes. It would be one thing if this, and then, you know, the audacity of mentioning a name of somebody I do know. Completely fucking ridiculous. You know, I don't give a fuck who believes what I have to say or whether I know Casper the Friendly Ghost or fucking Jeffrey Dahmer, whoever the fuck it may be. It's not for public consumption. I don't run around fucking, oh, I know this one, I know that one. I don't give a fuck. I don't take photos with nobody. People think in social media you got to take a photo with somebody to prove you know somebody. I don't need to do that. It protects me, protects them, and I don't give a fuck what the public's perception of me is personally. I don't care. You either like what I do or you don't. That's okay. But I treat everybody the same. I treat them with respect. I treat them with loyalty. I act like a fucking gentleman. And if you don't want to act that way, then we can address it in a different way. I learned a very valuable fucking lesson last year in January with somebody. And that person knows who he is, and I know a lot of other people know the story I'm talking about. But the thing is, the things you say do catch up with you, and that is true. But if you're not lying and you're telling the truth, I will guarantee you 9 times out of 10, if you say something about somebody that is true, they're not going to be nearly that heated about the shit. They may not like you talking about them. But people that want to act respectful and carry themselves a certain way, I'll respect all day, even if they don't fucking like me. If they don't like me and they come up to me and they say, oh, you're a real piece of shit, this, that, and the third, I'll accept that all fucking day. I would rather somebody be brutally fucking honest with me and tell me straight up they don't fucking like me, they don't like what I do. All right, we don't like each other. That's all right. Versus somebody that fucking gets on a keyboard and just runs his fucking cocksucker 9 times out of 10. Because that's all they do. And I'm not even like heated about somebody talking shit. It happens every day. But this particular fucking idiot infuriated me because he mentioned somebody I didn't know. And I don't like that. Don't tell me you know somebody, then not realize I could be friendly with them and use that to intimidate me, because that's just not going to fly in my world. That's the bottom line. All right, so all that being said, we are going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to get to your questions. And once again, you know, people get a little bit upset because I don't get to their questions sometimes, but it's because it's been asked 1,000 fucking times, or it's just too in-depth. I like to answer questions and give you the whole thing. You know, so when you ask me a broad question, it's hard for me to get to exactly to pinpoint what you're asking. So for future reference, if you're going to ask a question, I'm not telling you just to dummy it down for me, but get right to the point. Don't ask me such a broad topic that you know is going to take 40 minutes to deliver an answer for. Other than that, I hope everybody is safe. I hope everybody's content. For my friends out there, you know who they are. You know who you are, obviously. But all that being said, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get to your Q&A. Stay tuned for this next little bit when we take the break. I think some of you are going to get a kick out of it. Be right back.
Today's Mob Talk Radio episode is brought to you by the following sponsors. Scarf Inc. Pest Control Services. If you've got a pest, we'll whack them out.
I know at times we like to have a lot of fun on this show, but it's time to get serious about one thing. I know that the coronavirus pandemic has hurt a lot of my listeners and their businesses. Restaurants have been ordered to close, gyms have been ordered to close, cigar lounges have been ordered to close, and even bars have been ordered to close. These are small businesses that don't always have the cash reserves to continue making their rent or mortgage payments. They can't even pay their vendors. My good friend Mike Kaysen of Kaysen & Kaysen is an experienced bankruptcy lawyer that is there to help you right now. Kaysen & Kaysen represents individuals and small businesses in complex bankruptcy proceedings in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Miami. Give Mike a call at 646-397-6226. And if you mention Mob Talk Radio, he's going to give you a free consultation. Once again, it's Mike Kaysen of Kaysen & Kaysen, 646-397-6226. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We're going to get right into your questions. All right. The first question is, how come you won't answer certain questions about certain guys? I've asked the repeated same question the last couple of weeks and you won't answer it. Is it because you don't know or you just refuse to answer? If you message me about somebody in particular, and if I don't know the information, I'll tell you straight up I don't know the information. I'll be honest about that. But if the question is geared towards somebody personally, I'm not going to get into that because I don't think that's right. I don't think that's fair. I see a lot of other websites that do that. I even see other journalists do that, and you know the two fucks I'm talking about. I just won't do it. I feel like on a certain level, if it's a court case and there's documents and whatever the case may be, that's a little different. But when you ask me specifically about an alleged this guy or that guy, I'm not going to get into it because you can do your own research. I'm not going to, I come from the school where if people don't want me to talk about them, I'm not going to. It's just as simple as that. All right. So do you not like John Gotti all of a sudden? What's the reason for that? No, that's not really it. Like I've always said, John Gotti was a street guy, a tough guy, and he died thumbing his nose at the FBI, and that's old school. That's very old school, but just because he had those traits doesn't mean that we can toss out the negative aspects of who he was to the side. We have to be fair, and you have to call it down the middle, which I've always done to a certain point. So at times, people will cherry pick what I say and they'll say, oh, look at him. He's this, he's this, he's this. But they don't listen to the whole side. They hear what they want and then they run with it. But like I said, we got to be fair. And look, Gotti's always going to stand for a code. He's always going to stand for honor. And he's always going to be the face of the mafia like Al Capone for the rest of history. Okay, that's the reality. But with that comes some very negative things. And just because I mentioned those negative things does not mean that I'm anti this or anti that. Just like Lucky Luciano, he was the godfather of organized crime, but he also did some shady shit, especially when it came to Vito Genovese, Joe Masseria, and Salvatore Maranzano. We can't look past that. People have claimed I don't like Lucky Luciano because of that, or I've called him this, or I've called him that. The same can be said for Carlo Gambino. Nobody's perfect, but when people begin to put Gotti on that seventh step, they either don't understand the ramifications of what he did or they just look past it. It doesn't make him any less of a human being. It just means that he's flawed and he's not perfect. Was he the greatest boss ever? Absolutely fucking not. His run was very short in terms of being a boss. I think people get confused with what my thoughts are sometimes. Just like some people like me. I've said it before. Many hate me. Is that a distorted view? No. I mean, it's their view. Everybody's entitled to have an opinion. What people should marvel about Gotti is that he never quit. He never gave in. He stood tall and said, look, this is who I am. Go fuck yourself. So while we can argue, that Gotti was a street guy, this, that, and the third, we cannot deny that there were some negative aspects to who he was. Like, I had intestinal fortitude. I don't think anybody's going to tell you he wasn't. And nobody's going to tell you he wasn't a gangster. But all I'm saying is he wasn't Al Capone. He wasn't Vinny the Chin. And he wasn't even Lucky Luciano. You cannot make a mountain out of a fucking molehill. But you cannot sit here and act like he's the greatest this or the greatest that without talking about some of the negative aspects of his leadership. And some people don't like that. Some people want you to just be straight up a flag-waving fuck. But I'm not. I've always kind of called down the middle, and if people have a problem with that, then that's okay. I'm not disparaging the guy. I'm not talking ill of the dead. I'm just saying let's be honest about who he was as a whole. He wasn't the greatest boss ever. People can claim that and say what they want. But there's a lot of negative aspects. All right. Ori Spotto, do you buy his story or not? I don't know who. I know who Ori Spotto is, but I don't know him obviously personally. But what I can sort of say is this: is that he is telling the truth about some things. He's telling the truth about Sonny Francis, and he's definitely telling you the truth about Michael Francis. And I don't tell you that because I just don't like Michael. I'm telling you that Ori Spotto is telling the truth about that. These are things I've been saying for a long time now, and Ori Spotto just sort of doubles up on that. I had never heard of Ori Spotto in my life until the last couple of months, but there is something particular I sort of want to point out. Ori Spotto has never said he was a gangster. He's never come out and said, I'm a mobster, I'm a mafioso. He's never said that. So he's being honest about who he was as far as that life goes and whatever his involvement was. The guy did prison time. So it's not like he came out of fucking Iowa and he's making a bunch of shit up. But I don't know if I care enough to really buy his story because I'm sure there are parts of his stories that he will inflate, and that's okay. He seems like a pretty genuine guy, a nice guy. Seems like him and I got some common hatreds, which is great. But what you should do is just buy his book. And this isn't a plug for his book. His book is entitled The Accidental Gangster. And decide for yourself. I'm not here to disparage the guy. I'm not here to tell you that he's telling you the truth. I just think we need to be valid here, and how you're valid with these things is saying there's probably some stuff that's bullshit and some stuff that's very true, and you have to sort of mitigate those things. You got to jump in the water and see for yourself what you believe and what you don't. I mean, he's not out here like a lot of guys getting into internet fights. He's just simply trying to sell a book and talk about his alleged past, and I can't knock the guy for that. Let him do his thing, but I'm also going to say, don't run out and all of a sudden think he was Vito Genovese or Vinny Gigante, because he wasn't. And I don't think he's trying to sell you that either. And so from my perspective, I can't knock a guy that's trying to make a fucking dollar, but I'm also not the moral authority or the moral compass to him either. He's done nothing to me, so I'm not going to kick the guy in his fucking nuts. But, always take everything you read with a grain of salt. Do your own research. That's all it takes. If you just invest the time to research something, you're going to find out for yourself. I haven't taken the time to research anything other than his prison stuff. And from what I can tell, he's being legitimately honest about a lot of stuff. But like I said, anytime you write a book, especially when you're writing about yourself, you have a tendency by nature to diminish the things you did. And I'm not going to say embellish because that's the wrong word, but you diminish your part and sort of amplify everybody else's. And that's just human nature to deflect. And there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody does that. It's like the big fish story. I caught a 3-foot this, a 3-foot that, but when in reality it was a 3-inch minnow or whatever the fuck. So he's obviously in all the mob group pages. So if you're interested, go out and buy his book, read it for yourself. Let me know. If you have read his book, let me know what you think. I'm not going to buy the book. I have no interest in it. But if you've read it, let me know what you think. All right. If backed into a corner and you had no choice, do you stick with Philly or New York, and why? I don't know what the terms of this question are, but probably Philadelphia. No questions asked. I mean, there's just too many personalities in New York. See, the thing is, I guess it depends on, like I said earlier, the situation. But if I had a problem, as if to say a serious problem, I'd rather be in a situation and have the loyalty of a bunch of people versus like one or two. That's not a disparaging thing about New York. It's just, it's where I stand. I'd rather stand and fight with those I know who won't hesitate versus those who might. You have to align yourself, in life. We're not just talking the streets here, but you have to align yourself in life with people who will defend you and stand up for you, even when they disagree with you and don't necessarily believe in your stances. It's not about the streets. It's just a fucking fact of life. True friends can disagree with you, not like what you did, but when the storm comes, you don't have to look behind you because they're in front of you. And I think too that I have a certain personality about issues in certain scenarios, and all I can really say is when it comes to my own standards, what I believe in or how I feel things should be, I always look for people who have the same sort of thinking that I do, people who have the same sort of standards I have, people who have the same beliefs I have. My personality is probably closer to Philadelphia than really anywhere else, and so I hope that kind of explains it. And I just have this thing where I just don't let people talk about my friends, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If we break bread every Sunday. It doesn't matter if we're on the phone every day. It doesn't matter if I see you every 3 days. It's the principle that's involved. And like I said earlier, I don't mention people's names because maybe they ask me not to. See, I get questions all the time from people and asking about people, and I just don't get into a lot of that because I just don't like that shit. If they don't want to see their names in print, they don't want to see their names in papers, I'm going to live by that. But there is still an old school way about a lot of guys. And, if I'm asked as a friend to forget what I hear, to forget what I see, not to repeat whatever, then that's exactly what I do. I have enough respect for people and consideration to look the other way and forget about them from the narrative of the press or fanboys, fangirls, etc. But like always, as my friend reminds me, if you act like a gentleman, you're going to get treated like a gentleman. And it's really, really, really as simple as that. All right. Could the coronavirus delay the impending trial of Anthony Comello? The murder was a year ago, and it seems like the feds are in no hurry. Now, with this health outbreak, one would assume the feds are really absolutely in no hurry now. What are your thoughts? And thank you for your show. Look, anytime you got a murder trial, especially one that is as big as this one, it takes 2 to 3 years just to get the trial to begin with. And with the New York court system effectively pretty much shut down at this point, there's no telling how long it's going to take. But I expect it's going to be at least another year. A lot of it's going to depend on how long this fucking plague goes on. All right. Is it true that John Gotti Jr. sat down with the feds and proffered? Yes, he did. However, I'm not going to get into all that. There is going to be a large section of the book that I'm working on that is going to speak directly to that. So I don't want to get it. Listen, it's not because I'm hiding behind a veil or nothing like that. It's just that I really dive deep into that in the book that I'm working on, and I would rather address it there than on this platform. But yes, he did. And I don't think he would deny that. I don't think anybody else would deny that. I think that's very public by now. But yes, he did. All right. So Gambino had DeMeo and his crew. Bonanno had Patera. The Columbos had Scarpa. Who, in your opinion, was the Genovese and Lucchese's most feared killer? Gas pipe, absolutely, for the Lucchese's. Listen, rather than go, I can riddle off like fucking 8 names now. Gas pipe, Castleroy, DeMeo, Mad Sam DiStefano, Frank Abendando, Harry Strauss, Giovanni Brusca, Albert Anastasia. Christ, anybody from Murder Inc. I mean, everybody's got a killer in their crew. That's just how it operates. All right. As technology is advancing and everything is sort of coming into digital technology, do you think the future gangsters won't be your typical tough guys, arm and leg breakers, but more tech-savvy geeks with a gun? No, I think they're always going to use physical violence. I don't think that's really ever going to change. But with technology and cameras in every corner, it makes it a lot more difficult, obviously, to do that. But I don't think that the tactics of the Mafia are ever going to change. They haven't in 100 years. They're not going to change now. All right. When John Stanfa left to New York from Philadelphia after the Bruno hit, which of the 5 families was he working for, and what would have been his rank? Look, I'd assume any contact that he had was with the Gambinos, obviously, but he was in hiding a lot during that time, so I don't necessarily think he was, like, working the streets per se. But I think, obviously, it was John Gotti who backed him when he showed up in Philadelphia and expected to take over. So he had Gambino backing, so I would expect, and I could totally be wrong about this. I don't know what his fucking rank would have been. I don't honestly think he was a captain. I'll be very frank with you. And I think that Gotti put him there because, who knows why Gotti did that. But it didn't work, did it? Didn't work. Because the young guys put it to his ass. Straight up. I mean, you can't. And I take a lot of shit because I have said on record that what the younger crew, because I'm not going to call them the Young Turks, I'm not going to fucking throw out names, but I think what they did was respectful. I think first of all, I've always thought that John Stanfa was involved in the Bruno hit. He wasn't touched. Everybody else got killed, not Stanfa, right? So then Stanfa gets placed back in Philadelphia to take over. Well, I can understand from the perspective, who the fuck this guy think he is? He ran away. He ran a fucking way. He was in hiding, and he's going to come here and try to tell us what to do? Oh, no. And they took it to his ass, and they won, and that's the reality of it. And some people say, well, look at him, he's validating violence. Well, in that particular case, I am. I don't disagree with what happened, and I think that it's very telling that after that happens, nobody else has tried that shit ever again. It's a dog-eat-dog world in the streets, and they did what they had to do. It's as simple as that. And I think that when Gotti pulled that shit and sent Stanfa down there, it really created a lot of fucking hatred maybe not to the Gambinos per se, but probably some very discontented feelings about Gotti. I would almost guarantee that. But that's me speculating at best. All right. I'm just speculating on this, but had Neil Delacroce become boss, what do you think Paul's role would have been in the Gambino family? Honestly, I don't know. Probably consigliere, and I think it would have been that way because, look, Paul Castellano was not a shooter. He was a business guy for the most part. Don't get me wrong. He was a dangerous guy. I've always said that. But he wasn't the kind of guy that was going to grab a gun and go out on the street and start popping motherfuckers. That's just the reality of it. So I think likely, had Delacroce become boss, he would have kept him on as a consigliere, but I don't think he would have been made an underboss or anything close to it. Paul just didn't have the personality for it. It's easy to order a murder. It's different to actually commit it. And the guy wasn't a pussy either. He really wasn't. But at the end of the day, this Paul could press a button and 20 guys would go away. That would be it. But I just think that there's a big difference between Neil and Paul, just character-wise and tough-wise. All right. According to the TV show Boardwalk Empire, Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky were under the leadership of Arnold Ace Rothstein. How true is the depiction of the story told on this show? To be honest with you, I really tried to get into the show, but I could never get past a few minutes at a time. Maybe I should go back and watch it. So I don't know specifically how they filmed that or how they told the story, but what I can tell you is that Lansky and Luciano did learn a lot of things from Rothstein. So if they played it that they came up, under him and learned the rackets from him, that would be accurate. But like I said, I tried watching the show and I just couldn't get into it. I just couldn't get into it. And I think a lot of that is it came too soon after The Sopranos. And so there you go. All right, reports say that when Frank Nitti was found, they found 3 shots that were fired, 1 in the hat, 2 in the head. Do you think his death was a legitimate suicide or a cover-up because the indictment's coming from the Hollywood scam? Well, first of all, how the fuck do you shoot yourself 3 fucking times and not die? I mean, twice in the head, you're still alive. You shoot yourself in the fucking brain, it's over, right? So I've never believed he killed himself. I've always thought he was killed. And look, he had a bit of Tony Soprano in him, and what I mean by that was he was a mental case. He had a probably what we would know now as a mild form of schizophrenia. He suffered from a lot of different mental difficulties, and that probably was more of a reason why they got rid of him, because they didn't know what the guy was going to say. The mob's concern probably would have been that he might open up his mouth, say too much, and it's sort of the same situation that many after him had problems with, like you look at Sam Giancana and Mad Sam DiStefano. Not that Giancana was mental, but they didn't know what he was going to say. DiStefano, on the other hand, was a complete fucking whack job, and they had no idea. I mean, listen, Mad Sam DiStefano would bring in hookers and bang them in front of his wife. That was the type of guy he was. He was a real fucking loose cannon, to say the least. All right. With the pandemic going on and all the borders being shut down, do you see that having a large effect on the Canadian and American mafia? If so, which one will be affected more? I think probably the reality is the American mob's going to suffer more just because it's wider territory. But I'm also cautious enough to say that if there's a way to find making $1, they're going to do it. They're going to make a killing during the pandemic if they can do it, and that's just reality. Look, imagine booze stops coming in from Canada. You're going to see like a new form of prohibition happening. So with everything that's going on, I mean, look back to 9/11. The mob made a ton of money with scrap metal at 9/11. So if you think they're not going to sit back and try to find a way to take advantage of it, you're out of your mind. Canada is going to lose a lot of money because of the huge tobacco trade, but it's really going to depend on how this country reacts with the plague. If the trucks stop going over the borders and the borders remain closed and nothing's getting in, then Canada's really going to take it in the ass tobacco-wise because that's one of their biggest rackets. Narcotics, same sort of thing. Shipping lanes are going to close. So, in a very strange way, this is almost like 1910 all over again. I mean, and the longer this goes on, the more risks that guys will probably start taking. You can't collect if everybody's got the fucking plague. I mean, to me, $1,000 ain't worth getting the plague and shit and blood the rest of my life, All right, in the book Mafia Prince, there's a lot of talk about Louis Bobby Mana. There's not a lot of information about him. How big of a player was he in the Genovese crime family, and why did he go to prison? Would he have become boss after Vinny the Chin had he not been in prison? Look, Bobby Mana was a player, no doubt. His major power base was really in New Jersey, and at one point he was an acting consigliere and oversaw 4 different captains. After Bruno gets sort of whacked, the Gambinos and the Genovese sat down with him and specifically tried to figure out how to whack up Angelo's territory. Mana's role was to have discussions to figure out who and what went where. Mana was the lead in the hit on John Gotti Sr. When they were going to kill John Gotti Sr., he was the guy put in charge of it. The other issue is that, talking about this time period, was that John Gotti, when he takes over, sort of wanted to strip Philadelphia of South Jersey, and that created a lot of fucking problems. But Mana was a player. He was tight with Vinny the Chin, but he probably likely never would have been boss, and he ends up going to prison for planning the hits of John Gotti, Gene Gotti, and for racketeering. And so that's just a little description of Bobby. All right. I know you really don't know much about gangsters, ha ha ha, but in the movie The Craze, it says they did business with Angelo Bruno. Is that true? No. To my knowledge, they knew him but didn't have any business with him. Who would win in a fight against Tony? Who would win in a fight? Tony Mira or Tommy Agro? Probably Anthony Mira. Anthony Mira. All right. This is a good question. It's an interesting question. People are not going to like this question, but what kind of heat, if at all? Okay, let me rephrase this because I actually jotted it down wrong. All right, what kind of heat do you get from people in the life for what you do? I understand. Okay. Let me reread this. My bad, guys. All right. What kind of heat do you get from people in that life for what you do? Do they see you as a harmless historian, or are you seen as a mouthpiece for the street life? I understand the angle you do on your show. I also understand that you're not in the life, but these things always pop into my head when I listen to your show. Honestly, I really don't get any heat at all. It's really kind of quite the opposite. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to go into the details of who I'm friendly with, who I'm not. But I think that I have close friendships with people that would probably shock a lot of different people. But it's just like I've said repeatedly, it's not for public consumption. Who I know doesn't make me any more special. And while I may be tight with this person or that person, there are people that don't like me, right? So I've had 2 instances where people have sort of stepped up to me and told me what they think of me. But usually after a drink gets bought or we talk, I'm not saying they come to like me, but they come to understand that I'm not out to fucking hurt nobody. I'm not out to build my reputation on who they are. It's just as simple as there's just information out there and I put it out, and whether they like it or not, is one thing. Look, the radio guy that you hear right now and me, we're the same people, but we're at different volumes. I'm not afraid of anybody, really. But if you look at what I do, probably back in the old days, somebody who did what I'm doing probably get my legs broken, my head cracked. But you also have to look at the context of what I actually do. I don't gossip. I'm covering, for the most part, the history of organized crime. But when I do talk about people or current things, pay close attention to how I do actually do it. I'm defending them. I won't listen. I won't defend anybody if I don't know them in some sort of capacity. A lot of people say stupid shit like, where's the photos of you and them, blah, blah, blah. But what people don't get is, if I know people personally, I don't need a fucking photo. I don't need to validate myself to anybody. I don't need to stand next to 10 guys and have the world know my business or theirs. And so any friendship I have with anyone in that life is based on mutual respect. And honestly, I don't need to know this one. I don't need to know that one and brag about it. But what I can say is this. I'm 2 very big guys. And maybe we're talking a capo, an underboss, a street boss, or maybe a soldier, or maybe a fucking nobody. I don't want to get into specifics about who these people might be or what their alleged rank is, but they tell me all the time, nobody sticks up for us. You act like a gentleman all the time with us, and that's why we treat you like family and a gentleman. So am I a mouthpiece? Yeah, in many ways I am, but I think that the ones that have taken the time to see past sort of this persona realize that I am this guy, but I'm a little different in a personal capacity. I think everybody knows I was a criminal in my past. I haven't hid that from anybody, and I don't deny that. And so I understand, how the system operates, how the government operates, and how police operate. And I just defend my friends. And there's always going to be people that aren't going to like you. There's going to be people that will step to you and they're going to say, do yourself a favor, do me a favor, don't fucking talk about me. If they ask me to do that, I don't do it because I'm intimidated by them. I do that because it's a mutual respect. Because I know that if I went to them and said, hey, can you do me a favor, don't say this, that, they're going to do it too. So it's not an intimidation factor. Nobody's going to fucking intimidate me. I don't care, and this is not a shot. And this is where I need people to really listen, because somebody's going to take umbrance with what I'm about to say. They're going to run with it, and they're going to put fucking words in my mouth. I don't care who you are in this life, be it a janitor, be it a fucking secretary, be it a cop, be it whoever. I'm going to treat you how you treat me. I don't give a fuck what rank you have. I don't give a fucking what your financial situation is. If you act like a fucking gentleman, I'll act like a gentleman. You treat me like a fucking prick, then I'm not going to back down. It's not that I want a death wish, not that I'm afraid, not afraid of people. Somebody said to me in passing, what your problem is, Jeff? You're not afraid of nobody. That's what your problem is. It's going to be your undoing. I disagree with that. You have nothing to fear if you're just being honest with the fucking people you deal with, and you're just fucking respecting people. If you respect people, you can have a disagreement all day long. I don't like what you said, but it is what it is. And that's sort of where I stand. So anybody that's ever had a beef with me or a problem with me, we addressed it like men, and it is what it is. Nobody ever threatened me. Nobody ever touched me. Nobody ever threatened to fucking hurt me. It was always just a simple matter of, you don't fucking know me, get to know me, and if you still feel that way, fine. But please, don't put my name in this, don't put my name in that. I particularly don't want my name in the press, and I get it. And they have every fucking right to do that, which is the difference between me and those two ass wipes down in South Philly. Because like I've said 100 times, they will jerk each other off hiding in the bushes, to somebody coming out of their house in fucking handcuffs at 6 in the fucking morning. You don't got nothing better to do at 6 in the morning to hold each other's pricks, jerk off on the cracker, because somebody's getting arrested. So that's the difference between me and other people. And listen, at the end of the day, if anybody comes to me and asks me for my help, I'm going to help them. I will tear the fucking stars out of the skies for them if that's what they fucking need. That's what makes me loyal to them. And does that get me into issues and politics? Yeah, unfortunately it does. And that's just the reality of what I do. But for the most part, it's just jerk-offs on the internet that pull this shit. But yeah, I've had some issues with people, but they're always gentlemen. They always have a clear and concise point as to why they're agitated, and we talk about it like men. And that's my thing. You come at me like a man, and we talk, and you ask me personally not to do something, I'm going to do that. Just like if I went to them and asked them the same thing, they're going to do the same thing. That's just how it works. All right. Was Michael Franzese really giving out brochures for Joe Colombo just before he was shot, as Michael says in the various documentaries? I don't know. There's really certainly no footage of him there, and I tend to speculate that everything that Michael Franzese says is made up. Maybe he was there, but maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But like others these days, he inserts himself into every fucking infamous moment the mob has ever had, and his track record is that he's a lying piece of shit in many different ways, in multiple different ways. So I tend not to believe a fucking word that comes out of his mouth. I'll just be honest with you. That's just the bottom line. And I'm not picking on Michael. I'm really not. I just think when you're caught lying and you change your story 50, 60 different times, it's kind of a problem. All right, I've seen a few posts about Greg Scarpa and how much of a mafia guy he was, but I think him being a snitch totally depleted him. because I don't think he would have been what he was without the backing of the FBI. He was a killer and an earner, but how much of that was aided by his handlers? That's a great question because, and I say that because while Greg Scarpa was a hardcore earner and a fucking maniac and a psycho and a very tough, guy, it's hard to say how wild he might have been had the FBI not been covering his ass. We can also say, though, that even with them protecting him, he still fucking left the house with a GPS monitor attached to his ankle and shot people. So I think in many ways it's sort of both. I think that he benefited from the FBI, but I also think he didn't give a fuck. So I think it's really a bit of both things, to be honest with you. All right, do you know what the beef was between John Gotti Sr. and Sonny Franzese, and where did it stem from? Look, I can only speculate here. I don't know specifically, but I think a lot of it probably went back to John Gotti's ego, his mouth, and his bravado. I think a lot of people felt like what he did to Castellano was fucking wrong and out of line. Sonny was an old school guy. It also might have been that, Sonny believed in protocol and rules, and that, Gotti running his mouth everywhere, didn't help matters. I really don't know specifically, but what I can tell you is that Sonny Franzese gave the go-ahead for John Gotti Jr. to get killed. And it came up during Jr.'s trial that the FBI admitted that Sonny Franzese basically gave the go-ahead for, if people wanted to kill John Gotti Jr., go right ahead. I got no problem with it. There's a lot of reasons for that. But I don't know specifically what his personal beef was with him. Listen, some guys like John Gotti Sr. and they respected him. Other guys didn't. And that's just the reality. Not every boss is liked by everybody. Vinny the Chin hated Gotti. Hated him. Couldn't stand the son. Couldn't stand John Gotti Jr. Wouldn't even recognize John Gotti Jr. as a boss. And that is a lot of that has to do with the hit on Paul Castellano. At least that's what's been reported. I'm sure I'll get a fucking message that I was wrong about that because, you can't say anything fucking disparaging about anybody. So, I listen, that's just what's been reported. Do I know? Was I sitting there? No. All right. Who do you refuse a drink from first? Ratweiser or Georgie Anastasia? To be honest with you, I'd rather get ass rammed with a cactus and drink cyanide than to sit near either one of those fucking guys. I wouldn't do it. I can't do it. I don't want to go on a rant about these guys. I'm tired of talking about them. They're irrelevant to me. I have some personal issues with one of them. The other one's just a jerk off. So there you go. All right. Is there any family right now that has the power and influence over the mob like Gambino or Vinny the Chin in 2020? I think so. Maybe not the totality of it. Maybe there isn't one specific guy who these days could shut down the entire Eastern Seaboard. But there's probably one or two guys that have the power to do some serious stuff if they wanted to. But in terms of the big shit, say Carlo Gambino days, times are just totally different. But I still think that, yes, I think there is a particular family that has a lot of power and influence, definitely. All right, if you needed a bodyguard, who would you hire? Tommy Patera, hands down. All right, when Carlo Gambino was in the Mafia back in Sicily, was he working under Vito Casciafero? If he was, how come he sided with Masseria during the Castellamare War and not with Maranzano? What we do know is that Carlo Gambino was a made guy before he ever even comes to the United States. He also, prior to arriving in New York, was a hitman in Sicily. I do not think, though, however, he was under Vito Casciafero at all. The Gambinos... well, and I shouldn't say really the Gambinos, but I should say that, well, okay, in this sense, the Gambinos, as in the surname, had always been involved in the Mafia, as were the Castellanos. They each were involved and embedded in the mob for a long time. But you also have to remember in Italy, just like today, you have fringe groups and different bosses. Casciafero didn't rule over the whole entire country of Italy. And I think that Gambino really came over here and just sort of played both bosses, just like Luciano did. And I think that what Gambino was able to see is and recognize is what Luciano was attempting to do and sort of took lessons from it. Look, in that life, a guy is only loyal to the hand that feeds him. And once that stops, it's over. All right. What didn't you like about The Godfather? Man. I don't think I like specifically, if I had to really nitpick on something, I don't like how Coppola made the mob look regal. The mob in the early days was not regal. They killed, they robbed, they extorted, they did what they had to do. It was very, very grimy shit. And I think in many ways, The Godfather sort of reminded me or gave the impression that the Corleones are like the Kennedys. I think that was sort of the correlation that Francis Ford Coppola was trying to make. And listen, while I understand the premise, that's the one thing I just didn't like about it. I think that it made them too pageantry like royalty, and I think that the reality is it's not like that. And it's still a great film, but I just think that it was made too operatic in a sense. But then again, the counterpoint to that is if you just make a fucking 1970s version of Goodfellas, people are not going to go watch that. So I get it. All right. Did Toto Rina have any say in things after being imprisoned in the aftermath of the Maxi trials, or was he totally removed from power? He was definitely in charge until the day he died, and once he went, look out, the murders began. Toto Rina really had a grip on Italy, to say the least. All right. How is the mob protecting its members from coronavirus? I don't fucking know. I know that there was a mob boss in Italy that got caught. He was actually smoking in an abandoned house, and his police are going through the streets. They see smoke coming out of this window, and they enter, and they actually arrested a guy who they've been looking for months. So I don't think the mob is really thinking in terms of coronavirus and let's protect everybody. I think it's just pretty much stay in your fucking house. All right, is Cosa Nostra still the main dominant power when it comes to organized crime in the United States? Some say the Russian mob or the Sinaloa cartel is. I would say from my perspective, the Sinaloa cartel by far has the most power right now, only because of the sheer amount of money that they're bringing in, and they have the ability to kill fucking everybody. They don't hesitate to push a button, where the mob is sort of in a different stance. If you have a group that's going to kill your wife, your children, your cousins, and your aunties, your fucking uncles, if you get out of line, that is a lot more severe than owing a guy $1,000. He might crack your head a little bit. The cartel is all about drugs. They're not traditional rackets. The Russian Mafia really has a little power, but they're more hubs and crews. They're not like a big organized crime family. The Russian mob is not operated in that realm. But I think that dominant power, you got to argue what makes you more powerful, money or the fact that you're willing to kill a whole entire village. The mob still runs unions. That definitely brings them money and stuff like that. But I just think that in terms of severity, the Sinaloa cartel is no fucking joke. All right. Do you see organized crime getting a piece of this $1 trillion bailout coming to businesses as a result of COVID-19? I think things like subcontracting companies, construction companies, fringe construction companies, home rehab, absolutely, they're going to make out. Like I said earlier, the mob cashed in on 9/11, so don't think that they're not going to try to find a way to make a dime. All right. This is a question I don't want to fucking answer, and I'm going to answer it in a particular kind of way. Who is John A. Light? And is there any truth to John Gotti Jr. ratting him out to the feds? Okay, what I'm going to say is I cannot talk about John A. Light in any kind of matter because it's, when you sign gag orders, you really can't. So I'm going to leave that there. But did John Gotti Jr. rat him out specifically? I don't believe that's the case. I have not seen paperwork that shows that. But I'm going to address a lot of those two things, like I said earlier in my book. But I can't say for 100% certainty that Junior didn't. But I also can't say he did either. I think the facts surrounding what has been publicly put out would show that he didn't. But can I tell you for 100%? No, I can't. Do I believe he did? No, I don't. I don't. But like I said, we'll discuss all of that at a different time and place. All right, is there really such a thing as the gay mafia in Hollywood made up of people who target Hollywood and run the film industry? Well, I don't know if they call themselves the gay mafia, but probably so. There was always dirty journalists and who would blackmail actors and actresses back in the day, and I still think that goes on today in a major kind of way. The difference is that studio heads these days are the ones who wield the power and can do things that you would not believe, and I think we've seen that with Harvey Weinstein, some of this other stuff. Just specifically at Weinstein, he had connections to the Mossad and some other things like that. But I think the days of Hollywood blackmail are still there. It's just done in a different kind of way. But when studio heads can control your action, control your career, I mean, what do you kind of expect? I mean, it's always been that way, and I think it always will be. And I think it's a lot bigger than people think. But the days of Mickey Cohen are over, for sure. All right, have the Bonanno crime family been given a seat back on the commission? Yes, that I can say yes, at least from what I heard. All right, can I drop off my monthly dues to chicks after you move to a pay site? I don't have PayPal. Why would you want to go to chicks to drop off your monthly payments to chicks? I'm going to assume you're talking about Phil Narducci. No, you can't drop my money off there. You crazy? I don't want to lose my 10%. I know you're just being tongue-in-cheek with it. And we're going to talk about the pay site in a couple of weeks. I'm backing it off because of the virus. People need to save money and people need to get groceries, and I'm not really concerned with getting money from people right now. It's my focus is on other things, and what's more important to me is that people have whatever extra money that they need, and I'm not a greedy fuck, and I'm not gonna do that to people. That's not me. Let the government gouge. I'm not gonna fucking gouge, but no, you can't go into chicks and drop off money. What are you, crazy? There's other places I'll send you. You don't got to go to chicks. I'll send you to Jersey, or I'll send you down to Florida, or I'll send you somewhere else. Don't go there giving my money to there. Don't get that poor bastard indicted, or me for that matter. Well, besides, you walk in there, you go, by the way, Phil, here's $20. The fuck is this? That's ridiculous. It's funny. It tickles me a little bit. That's some funny shit. But no, in all seriousness, this guy's joking who asked this. It is what it is. I don't know. Maybe if you drop off your $30 or whatever it is, maybe that gets me a free meal once a month or something. What's the vig on $30? All right. How do you think the situation would have played out for the Gambinos if the Cubans decided to send their men up and start a war after the Chris Rosenberg ripped off and killed their people? Look, if you're unfamiliar with what this person is asking me, let me sort of give you the backstory. Chris Rosenberg worked for Roy DeMeo, and Rosenberg pretty much got involved in narcotics trafficking with the Cubans, and rather than just do business and trade money for drugs, he ends up killing them. And the Cubans get pissed. They end up threatening to come to New York and kill everybody. And then Roy DeMeo sort of gets ordered by Paul Castellato to kill Chris Rosenberg, which he ultimately does at the end of the day. We're going to talk a little bit about that today once we come back after the questions. But had the Cubans actually come here, it probably would have been a very ugly situation. And the fact that the Cubans were shooters and weren't afraid of the Mafia or afraid of anybody else, they would have been willing to kill families, kids. It just goes without saying. So I just don't think it's a situation that would have ended well for them. But even if they did, I think a peace deal probably would have been brokered at the end of the day. It probably would have gotten Roy DeMeo killed a hell of a lot quicker than it did. But, we're never going to know because thank God that didn't happen. All right. This is an interesting one. Oh, God. Who is the rattiest of the rats? To me, Joe Valachi and Phil Leonetti. And it's not that I'm not including Gravano because I like him. I can't stand fucking Sammy the Bull Gravano at all. I'm just simply saying that to me, Joe Valachi sort of started all this nonsense. If Valachi never opens his mouth, the government probably wouldn't have had solid proof the mob existed as quick as they did. It still would have happened. I think the government still sort of thought it was going on, but I think Joe Valachi really goes down as the rattiest rat ever. But, Leonetti also, because in all my fucking life, I have never seen anybody as inept, delusional, or fucking stupid as Phil Leonetti. I just think that somebody ratting out their own family is pretty much as repulsive as it fucking gets. Not only was Leonetti emboldened by his uncle, but he didn't even have the heart to stand up to him. The fact that Leonetti is and was the most atrocious lying sack of shit says a lot to me. Look, he waited till he got sentenced to flip. He didn't do what everybody else does and say, I'm not going to do time, let me flip. Now, it wasn't until he got 40 years that he decided to be a fucking bitch and tell on everybody. If that does not tell you what Phil Leonetti's motivation was, nothing will. And for the record, I hope Phil has horrible dreams about Nicky Scarfo coming out of the fucking dirt with a pitchfork in his hand every night moaning his name. Fuck Phil and anybody who wears a raccoon on their head like Phil. All right, what podcasts do you listen to? I listen to Joe Rogan. I listen to Jim Cornette, who, if you don't know who Jim Cornette is, he's a wrestling manager. Not that when I was a kid, I liked wrestling. You know, we're talking about the 80s to mid-80s. Jim Cornette was a pro wrestling manager. He's hilarious. I love listening to stuff. I listen to Howard Stern. And my other favorite podcast besides Joe Rogan is my friend Scott William Collier's podcast, which is called the True Crime Page podcast. If you're into serial killers, mass murderers, he sort of covers it. From a really, interesting perspective. All right, who is more powerful, Russell Bufalino or Frank Costello? Probably Russell Bufalino. Ray Patriarca or Stefano Magaddino? Probably Magaddino at the time. Carlos Marcello versus Joe Bonanno. Carlos Marcello, hands down, was stronger than Bonanno. Genovese versus Persco. Probably Genovese. DeCavalcante versus Nicky Scarfo. That's a tough one there. I'm going to give it to Nicky only because Nicky was a fucking psychopath with a penknife. All right, do you think Jimmy Burke created a monster when he introduced heroin to Henry Hill, and did it come back to bite him in the very end? Well, Henry Hill did that on his own. It wasn't through Jimmy Burke. Henry Hill got his contacts when he went away to prison, and so I don't think it was necessarily Jimmy Burke's responsibility. It was Henry Hill's on that, but did it create a monster and a problem? Absolutely 100%. All right, what was the most destructive family war? The Profaci Gallo Colombo War, the Bananas War, or the Galante Rastelli Three Capos War, or the Gaspipe Lucchese family struggle? To me, the Colombo Wars were probably the most destructive. I don't think there were three of them, and I think that really was some fucked up shit that happened, but it's reality. All right. Which family is the most or was the most dysfunctional of the five families? In my opinion, the Bonanno crime family is. That's just my opinion, and that's based on indictments and rats and everything else. What's best to be boss, to be feared or respected? In my opinion, I'd rather be feared than respected. I'd rather be feared than loved. Fear lasts longer than love, and that's just where I stand on that. Would Sammy Gravano been a better boss than John Gotti? In so many words, yes, I think so. That's just my opinion. I know he's a rat. I know people hate him, and I don't like him either, and he's a scumbag, but in my opinion, that's it. All right, I recently went to Philadelphia, and I stopped in at Kitchen Consigliere in Jersey on the way down, and it was absolutely fantastic. Then my wife and I went to Chick's for some drinks, another fantastic spot. You were right on with all of those suggestions. I still want to go to Dante and Luigi's and the Saloon. The one thing I noticed about Philly is how everyone there has their head on a swivel. They seem to be cautious. Is that just a South Philly thing? Thanks for the suggestions. I'm also going to try Saltwater down on the shore this summer. I heard you say their food and service is beyond good things. Yeah, Saltwater's fantastic. If you get the opportunity, if you're on the shore, definitely go there. Definitely, if you've never been to Angelo's restaurant in Collingswood, New Jersey, called Kitchen Consigliere, you should definitely go there. Great food. It's peasant food, and it's fantastic. It's the closest thing to mom's cooking you're ever going to get. I haven't been there in a long time. I haven't even, talked to Angelo in a long time, but all great places. I wasn't a huge fan of the Saloon. I hate to tell you that. I like the Saloon, but it just, I don't know. Maybe I just picked the wrong fucking day to go there. But as far as South Philly being cautious, no, I don't think it's necessarily a South Philly thing. I mean, it's just a human nature thing. You know, if nobody's ever seen you and you go in and they don't know who you are, they're not going to talk to you. I mean, it's just the sort of how they are. It's not necessarily a South Philly thing. All right. I was recently talking to my cousin down in South Philadelphia, and he said you're down there a lot, hanging out in a couple of different spots. I know there's a lot of shit talkers, and I know you don't put out where you go, but I heard you like dark spots, LOL. I don't know what the fuck that means. Someone I know said you were a good guy and were well-liked down there. So don't let the haters hate. They are just jealous. Look, I've said it all the time. I go down there. I hang out in the same spots. I know a million different people down there. If somebody says I'm a good guy, for every person that says I'm a good guy, there's 50 others that say I'm a piece of shit, right? Whether I'm well-liked or not, I don't know. Nobody tells me these things. If they do, they do. If they don't, they don't. If people want to hate, they can hate. Listen, I just carry myself a certain way. If people like me, that's great. If they don't, then that's okay too. All right, can a street guy get by on reputation alone, or does he need to be conciliatory in a sense? I think you have to be conciliatory. I think you have to know when to fold them, not to quote a fucking Kenny Rogers song. But I think you have to be both. I think you have to be tough, but you also have to be able to mitigate problems. I think you have to be able to sit down and say, okay, this is what I really want, but I'm willing to bend on X, Y, and Z. I think if you can't be both ways, then you create a hatred for yourself. And like Machiavelli says, it's okay to be hated, but if you're hated to the extent that people will want to overthrow you, it becomes a problem. So it's better to play the middle ground. All right. Have you ever had a problem in Philly? I sort of kind of answered this earlier. Look, the truth is, if I was being reckless and stupid, I mean, you got to understand, I wouldn't be walking very long down the streets there. That's the reality of South Philly. That's the reality of that life. You give respect, you get respect, and so at the end of the day, it's a tough situation for me because on one hand, I understand that people aren't going to like me, and I'm okay with that. But I really don't have problems like that. I know a lot of people are going to say the opposite of that, but they don't know, and they're just shit talkers and whatever. But even if guys don't like you in South Philly, they still respect you. They're not going to go out of their way to be a dick. They're not going to, go out of the way to be a fucking prick to you. And that says a lot of things about South Philadelphia's mentality. You can have a beef, you can have two opposite thoughts, but at the end of the day, guys are still going to respect you at least enough to hear what you got to say. They may not like it, they may not agree. And look, I'm not George Anastasia or that puke Mick fuck Ratweiser. I think he's German. I don't even think he's Irish. He's got to be German with the name like Ratweiser. Goose stepping his way down the street with the camera in one hand and Anastasia's prick in the other. I'll give you an example. Somebody told me the other night, they said to me, because apparently one or two particular individuals don't like me and didn't understand why anybody was talking to me. And he says to me, I don't understand why these guys are acting like girls. I don't understand why they don't like you. You're the only guy that's ever helped any one of us guys, and people should respect that. And if they don't, that's their fucking problem. But they shouldn't go out of their way to be a prick to you because you are defending us, and nobody does that. You're going to always be the first guy that people are going to run to get a little help. And I think, while I half agree with that statement, I just do as I'm asked. A guy anywhere doesn't got to be Philly because it hasn't just been Philly. It's been Chicago, it's been Florida, it's been New Orleans, it's been other places where guys have come to me. Jersey, Rhode Island. I mean, I don't just have friendships in one fucking state. And I get a lot of calls. I think it would surprise people, the fuckers that call me from Chicago. But look, if a guy calls me and says, hey, hold back on this, hold back on that, or here's the truth to this, here's the truth to that, then I'm going to honor that. I'm going to respect that and do what I'm going to do. I don't get my rocks off blasted anybody's business like Anastasia and Dave Schratweiser do. I don't get any rocks off of that. I don't have to take a photo of a guy coming out of a fucking row house and jerk off all over a fucking Teen Beat magazine or whatever the fuck. They don't, Tiger Beat, that's what it was. Remember back in the day they had Tiger Beat? It's almost like Anastasia and Ratweiser don't have tiger beat. They got mob beat. And they just giving each other handy J's in the car. Hold the camera straight. Hold the camera straight. You're shaking too much. But, you know, all I try to do is educate, inform, and deflect. And that's exactly what the fuck I'm going to do. I'm never going to stop, and I'm always going to defend my friends. And if people don't like me because I defend this guy, or they think, you know, you shouldn't talk to this guy because of what he does, that's okay too. But just like you're going to come at me and you're going to make an assertion that I'm talking about you, first of all, check your fucking ego. That's number one. You're not that important to me, okay? And two, don't accuse, ask me. If you heard it come out my mouth or on this show, then by all means, how can I defend that? You know what I'm saying? But if you heard it from 10 other fucking people, do yourself a favor and just ask me. I'll tell you straight up if I did. I've never held back. I've always said, yeah, I said that. I was probably out of line. You know, I got no problem admitting that. But just because 10 guys like me and 3 others don't, I really don't give a fuck. I'm going to defend my friends. I'm going to help where I can. And and eventually the reality of what I do, and I'm not making myself important here. I'm not, self-grandizing nothing. Eventually defending people is going to put me behind the wall. I guarantee it. I don't have to commit a crime. But if I'm anti-FBI and I defend them, eventually they're going to try to find a way to stick it in my ass and put me away. They tried to fuck with me a year ago over some nonsense, so I'm not foolish enough to believe that fucking jerk-off, John Hahn, isn't going to find a way. The guy's a real scumbag. The amount of shit that he pulled in another trial years ago with some people was ludicrous. I'm not just, listen, I know John Hahn has to fucking do his job. I get it. But he's a scumbag and a prick. And that's the truth. So, prior to anything that might have happened to me, I didn't know who the fucking guy was. I could give a fuck less. Get on your fucking boat and go back to wherever the fuck you're from or whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, I think there is a large difference between prosecuting a criminal case and then getting personal. You can be Johnny Law, and you can stand up with your badge and say, I'm fighting for this, that, and the third. Criminals should go to prison, blah, 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 like a fucking 1940s film. But the minute that you make it personal, then you've lost all credibility as a prosecutor and as a human being. You can prosecute a case and not take it personal that somebody wears a nicer suit than you. Or somebody's got a nicer car, or a better-looking wife, or more well-rounded kids. But that particular individual has a problem. He got personal in multiple cases. It's not just one. And I don't like him. And I don't even know the fucking prick. But I don't like him because he tried to put me in the middle of a bunch of nonsense I had nothing to do with. Attempted to subterfuge my life by, I want this done, I want this search warrant, I want that because he's acting complicit with this one and that one. Go fuck yourself, you cocksucker. Look, I just don't like it. You don't have to like what I do, but they don't bust Jerry Capisci's balls. They don't bust Ratweiser's balls. I think that's probably because Anastasia's busy busting them. But that's the thing, So I already know. I already know that someday the things that I'm saying, I already know that the defense that I give people, the fact that I defend people, it's going to come back on me. I already know that. It already has. And so am I taking a risk? Sure, absolutely. Do I give a fuck? No. You could put me behind a wall. You think I'm going to stop defending people? And I'll tell you something else, and I've said this before. And I'm going to end it with the questions here, and we'll take a break and come back and do the rest of the show. When certain shit happened with Phil Narducci, okay, the government wanted to allege I acted in collusion with him to out an informant, to put out paperwork that was sealed. First of all, I did do those things. I did put paperwork out. I didn't get them from Phil. I didn't. But the government wanted to try to. First of all, the government had a softball case. They had a scumbag fucking jerk off, transvestite, drug dealing man, this terrorist fuck. They knew they had a soft case. Then the minute this shit comes out, now they really want to try to fuck Phil. And so in doing that, they wanted to come after me. And the thing is, and I'm really losing my fucking focus with this because that particular situation fucking infuriates me. But one of the things that happened when I found out what was going on, that they wanted to search and seizure my house, they wanted a search warrant from my house, confiscate all my electronic shit and all this garbage they were trying to do, which a judge signed off on, is that I was with an attorney. Because I made a call and said, this is what's going on. He goes, pack a bag. I'm getting you out of the state. And the reason why I did that was because I wasn't going to give them my computer. I wasn't going to give them anything. Which, at that point, I no longer had a computer or a same cell phone anyway. I'm not stupid. But one of the things that this guy said to me in the car was, he said, okay, couple things. One, did you do X, Y, and Z? No, of course not. Did this person do X, Y, and Z? Of course not. Are you willing to go to jail for this? And when he said that to me, I was, what the fuck you mean? Am I willing to go to jail? He said they can subpoena you to testify, and they can demand you testify. They can demand you hand over X, Y, and Z. I said, I'm not handing over nothing. And they can subpoena me to testify against this one, that, and the third. I'll cut my own fucking tongue out before that ever happens. And he said, the reality is, if they want to push this, you're going to end up in front of a fucking trial. I said, okay, and I'm going to stand there, and I'm not going to say a fucking word. And they can put me in prison the rest of my life. I'm not saying a fucking word because it's stupid. It's asinine, the whole fucking thing. So before I got involved in this show, I said to myself, you're going to pay for X, Y, and Z. Are you willing to do that? Of course. If I wasn't, I wouldn't be fucking doing this. Do you think I would defend people if I thought in a million years these fuckers wouldn't come after me? And so that's my point. It doesn't matter to me what anybody thinks about any individual. The point is that reality is, were they really going to subpoena me? Probably not at the end of the day. It was a lot of fucking nonsense. But had they done that, I would have sat there on the stand like a deaf, mute fucking bastard, and I would have said, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know anything about this. And if they would have held me in contempt, so be it. Give me 3 fucking hots and a cot and let me laugh at the fucking audacity of you fucking idiots. That's stand up. If it's not, then I don't know what is. All right, so with that, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to talk about some of the biggest mob hits that have ever taken place. Stay tuned. On a given week, I'm out of town a lot. Whether it's Philadelphia, it's New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, wherever the case may be, I'm always looking for a place where I can sit down and have a great dinner. Ambiance is key. Price is obviously key. But the most important thing is the food good? And there's a place I want to tell you about today. It's called Saltwater at Margate. If you are going down to the shore, because I know a lot of people in Philadelphia go to the shore, especially Margate, you're missing out on a great restaurant if you haven't been there. The name is Saltwater Margate. It's at 9401 Ventnor Avenue, Margate City, New Jersey. The phone number there is 609-289-8078. You can also visit them online at saltwatermargate.com. This place is unbelievable. Not only is the food absolutely superb, the price is great too. They're renowned for their pizza and their gnocchi. They have all kinds of different things from mussels to roast pork and Italian fare. So do yourself a favor, do me a favor, go and visit Saltwater Margate. You will not be disappointed. It is a place that I think at some point, if not already, there's going to be lines out the door and around the block. So if you're down on the shore, stop in, go to Saltwater Margate. At least check them out online at saltwatermargate.com. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are going to talk about some of history's most infamous mob hits. We're going to cover 4 of them today, and then next week we're going to cover the next 4. But these are not in any ascending order as into importance or anything sort of like that. It just kind of comes down to random ones that I've picked. So yeah, there are going to be some that obviously historically are a lot more imperative than others, but it is what it is. And sort of, excuse me, instead of going into a full-blown biography of the people that were murdered, what I kind of want to do is just talk about the politics that were behind them and sort of kind of what happened. And the first one we're going to talk about is Carmine Galante. And while we know the basics, which basically were this, Carmine Galante was moving heavily into the drug trade, and he was really disrespecting everybody that was around him. And he likely sealed his own fate by refusing to share in the profits of the drug trade. That's the hit on its basic principle. Galante had been doing mob hits since he was a young kid, and obviously one of his more infamous hits was that he whacked Carlo Tresca on orders of Vito Genovese. Tresca was actually a newspaper journalist based in New York City, and the newspaper that he worked for was an anti-fascist newspaper, and the things that he was saying were agitating Benito Mussolini at the time, and Genovese was very enraged by this. And he goes to Mussolini and he pretty much says, look, if you want me to handle this, I'll take care of it. And that's exactly what he did. And Genovese ends up sending Galante to kill Tresca, in which he did on January 11th, 1943. Tresca is coming outside of his office in Manhattan, and Galante opens fire on him several times. And legend has it, and I don't know if this is true, but legend has it that Galante spit on Tresca's dead body, got into his car, and casually drove away laughing his ass off. Whether or not that's accurate, I don't know, but those are some things that have been said. So basically, here you go. In 1953, Joe Bonanno ends up sending Carmine Galante to Montreal, Quebec, in Canada. Bonanno needed somebody he trusted to oversee the narcotics operation, and he would basically work directly for Bonanno in that capacity, and he would also sort of work directly with the Catroni crime family, which we've talked about before on this show. At the time, Bonanno's were really, when they had the huge fucking meeting with Luciano and everybody divvied up territory of where they were going to work, and Bonanno was handed Canada, and this is exactly how Galante sort of gets there. And he was handling the Canadian part of the drug operation, which included cocaine and heroin. And he would accept narcotic shipments from Asia, and then they would turn around and move them into the United States. According to reports, Galante's end of the deal pulled in $50 million a year. And keep in mind, that's in 1953. In 1956, Galante would end up sort of getting sloppy while extorting a couple of businesses, and the Canadian government gets fed up and they toss him out on his ass. It would end up causing a few issues for the Bonanno crime family, but Galante, even outside of Canada, still had a lot of control. As a result of pretty much doing a pretty much good job there, Joe Bonanno ends up promoting him to consigliere of the crime family, and it would be Galante, Bonanno, and Luciano who would end up meeting in Italy to arrange for the Sicilians to come into the United States and to handle the trafficking of their narcotics. Luciano believed that no boss should ever put his hands on narcotics. It would decimate the crime family, so what they wanted to do was let the Sicilians handle it, give them a percentage and a kickback, and in turn they would be offered protection, like I said, a cut of the proceeds and etc. And Galante would begin to sort of import zips, or as we, they were basically Italians from Sicily who would work for the Bonanno crime family in many different capacities. Galante would begin to sort of start having problems when he gets arrested in 1958 on drug conspiracy charges. Galante would then sort of go into hiding, and then a year or so later gets arrested in New Jersey. He would end up posting bail and then get rearrested on more drug charges in 1960. The first trial, which included Billy Batts, William Bentvena of Billy Batts fame from Goodfellas, would actually end in a fucking mistrial. And during the second trial, a witness in the case would accidentally fall down 5 flights of stairs. But nobody saw a thing. But Galante ultimately would be convicted of those charges, and he would be sentenced to 20 years in prison. Galante would get out of prison in 1974 and would order the doors blown off of Costello's crypt as a sign that a new regime was about to begin. And the reason for that beef was that Costello was very much against the narcotics trade, and it infuriated Galante to no end. He sort of saw Costello as a weak puppet, and considering that Costello was now actually dead, he believed that drugs were a fair game and he could do what he wanted. But it is sort of a little condescending, though, how Costello felt concerning that Luciano was full force behind the narcotics movement. But you have to understand that once Luciano was exiled, it pretty much rendered him without a whole lot of power, and it was pretty much over for Luciano at the time. And Galante just wasn't going to have it. He wanted to do what he was going to do, and he was going to do it. The Bananos also start having some issues at the time and were sort of waffling on who was going to be the boss. Galante felt that the job should be his, and he wasn't shy about voicing that. The commission would end up naming Rusty Rastelli as the boss, and then Rastelli would end up going to prison in 1976, I think late 1976. And Galante sort of sees his opening and decides to take it and names himself the boss. Not to be stifled, he then began executing members of the Gambino crime family at will without any sort of threat of retribution. He would end up killing eight Gambino crime family members, to be exact. At the time, the Gambinos were also trafficking in narcotics as well, and Galante felt that they should step the fuck aside, stay in their lane, and if they didn't, he would kill them, which is pretty much what Galante did. And so that started a lot of resentment and probably a lot of fear. So the move not only infuriated the Gambino crime family, but it also sort of infuriated the commission at the time. The fact that Galante wouldn't stop, wouldn't sit back, wouldn't even negotiate, something had to be done. And then he sort of trumps the problem by refusing to pay tribute and share in the wealth of the narcotics trade, and believed that the drugs and the narcotics operation was his, belonged to him, and everybody else didn't have a right to it. Frank Funzi Thierry pretty much had seen enough, and while it wasn't his direct decision alone, he basically fielded complaints from other crime families on what Galante was doing. The commission at this point has enough, reaches out to Joe Bonanno for his input. I don't know why they typically went about it like that, because at the time Bonanno had pretty much been chased, but in any event, while Rusty Rastelli is in prison, he starts to hear what's going on. He doesn't like it, and he realizes that unless he moves on Galante, he may have a problem taking over if he ever gets out. And through Joey Messino, he sends word to the commission that Galante's got to go, and the commission sanctions the hit. July 12th of 1979, he was eating lunch at Joe and Mary's in Brooklyn. He was surrounded by friends and his Sicilian bodyguards, Baldassare Amato and Cesar Bonaventure. And about 2:45, three ski-masked gunmen enter the back patio of the restaurant. They open fire with sawed-off shotguns and handguns. Galante, Coppola, and Toronto were killed instantly, but it's worth noting that Bonaventure and Amato were not touched, which is very telling, and it simply means that they were likely in on it. Otherwise, they probably would have been killed right on the spot. And we do know today that one of the shooters was Anthony Indelicato, and rumors always persisted that Roy DeMeo also took part in that hit as well. So that's the reason why Galante ultimately was killed at the end of the day. The second person we're going to talk about today is Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. And look, we've all seen the photos, but a lot of people don't understand that there were multiple reasons for Benny Siegel getting killed. But the one thing that nobody mentions is the fact that Virginia Hill, who was his girlfriend at the time, was likely in on it as well. She knew it was going to happen, but nobody really mentions that. So we sort of have to go back in time a little bit. And we all know that Benny Siegel got his start with Meyer Lansky. Lansky, from an early age, saw a need for the Jewish criminals in New York to sort of come together to defend themselves against the Irish and the Italians, who were sort of overwhelming everybody. Lansky would then start the Bugs and Lansky mob, or the Bugs and Meyer mob, and they would use Benny Siegel as a hitman, which Benny Siegel really was good at. Lansky would then sort of put together a crew of serial killers, including Benny Siegel, Longies Willman, Louis Lepke, and Joe Stacher. And then Lansky sort of starts to move into bootlegging, and it was Benny Siegel who ended up keeping them all alive. Anybody who threatened their business, Benny Siegel would act without hesitation and would just kill them. So Siegel is showing his worth at a very young age, and Siegel had long been trusted by the Italians, because when Al Capone was wanted in New York City on a murder charge, it was Benny Siegel who grabbed Al Capone and hid Al Capone in his aunt's basement so the police couldn't get to him. And so because of that, he got a lot of street credibility and a lot of respect from the Italians. So in 1929, a very important meeting takes place, which has been dubbed by the media as the Atlantic City Conference. And the topic was pretty much about ending the bootlegging wars, expansion into other rackets, and to form a national crime syndicate. Around 100 guys attended the meeting, if not more, and it pretty much was the who's who of the mob. I don't want to sit here for the next 30 minutes reading names, but if you can imagine a mob name, they were all there. However, at this meeting, at the time this was taking place, Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano still had a stranglehold and were fighting, but they were not invited to this meeting. And it's long been sort of alleged that Luciano didn't invite them because he wanted to go there and sort of advocate for killing both of them. And Luciano also wanted organized crime to sort of come together under one umbrella and stop fighting each other and just focus on making money. So they would agree that the warring had to stop if organized crime was going to survive. And this would bring sort of Benny Siegel and Meyer Lansky from being enemies of the Italians to sort of being friends and business partners with the Italians. So by the late 1920s, Lansky and Benny Siegel were very tight with Frank Costello and Lucky Luciano. And April 5th of 1931, Benny Siegel, along with Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese, and Joe Adonis, end up killing Salvatore Maranzano. That was step one of Luciano's bigger plan. After his death, then would come the death of Masseria. Luciano would effectively take over and establish the commission. Then Lansky and Siegel would form Murder Incorporated, which was a mixed lot of killers who pretty much whacked for profit and at will. And also, Benny Siegel at the time had established himself as a good narcotics trafficker and extortionist, but he would still go out on hits for fun. He didn't need to kill anybody anymore, but he did it because he enjoyed it. Lansky, believe it or not, had pulled Benny Siegel aside and told him that at this stage of the game, you don't have to really do this anymore. We've got other people that can handle it. Benny Siegel always wanted to be in on murder because he just fucking enjoyed it. Then eventually Murder, Inc. gets handed over to Albert Anastasia and Louis Lepke to run. So the mob ends up sending Benny Siegel to California in the mid-30s, and the reason was very basic. He had a beef with the Fabrizio brothers. The Fabrizio brothers were close associates of racketeer Waxy Gordon. Gordon had sort of been a thorn in the side of Benny Siegel and Lansky, in sort of retribution for Waxy Gordon giving them problems. Lansky and Siegel dropped a dime on Gordon to the IRS, sort of informed them he wasn't paying taxes, and Waxy Gordon ends up getting arrested and sent to prison for tax evasion. And then as a result of that, Waxy Gordon ends up hiring the Fabrizio brothers to kill Meyer Lansky and Benny Siegel. Siegel finds out about it, doesn't waste any time, hunts them down, kills them both. But the problem was he killed two of the brothers, and the third brother actually wrote a memoir which specifically highlighted Murder, Inc., who ran it and what happened, and handed it to an attorney. So Benny Siegel loses his fucking mind. He checks himself into a hospital under fake pretenses, sneaks out in the middle of the night, and with the help of two friends, kills Fabrizio, doesn't waste any time. As a result of that murder, there's a lot of people in the mob world that wanted Benny Siegel dead, and they were going to sort of get some retribution. And so the mob sort of sends him to California to try to insulate him and protect him. His main job in California, there were a couple of things. The first thing was to help Jack Dragna set up gambling rackets. He would also bring in Mickey Cohen and put him in as his second command and sort of begin to put pressure on Jack Dragna to back the fuck off. So in other words, it was kind of like a takeover by Siegel. And he just sort of kind of showed up in California and Los Angeles and just kind of takes over. He ends up taking over the numbers rackets, but then he begins to use those profits to traffic in narcotics via Mexico, and he used Virginia Hill as an emissary. And the reason why he did was she spoke Spanish, she knew the right people, and the entire mob was using Virginia Hill to spy on other people and stuff like that. And so that's sort of how she begins her life with Benny Siegel. So there's a couple of issues. The first issue was that proceeds of the bookmaking racket were coming in. It was roughly like $500,000 a day. And the issue was that Siegel was starting to be seen around town with celebrities, and it began to worry guys from Chicago who had backed the National Racing Wire, at least financially. And it was a national racing wire service where they could take bets and et cetera, et cetera. and money started going missing. The receipts didn't match, and Chicago started to get a little bit concerned about it. They end up going to Lucky Luciano, who then, as a result of it, rather than do an investigation, just basically says, you know what, let's take it away from fucking... we're going to take it away from Benny Siegel, and let's just give it to Jack Dragna. And the move, when they made that, really pissed off Benny Siegel. Siegel sort of lets it go for the time being, but then he starts to move into the movie studios to extort them, to control the Writers Guild, the Actors Guild. He would force strikes on the unions to pay up. And while it was a good racket for the mob, it was a little bit too much considering he was hanging out with celebrities. He would end up even borrowing money from celebrities and then refusing to pay them back. And news sort of begins to filter back to the higher-ups about what Siegel's doing. And it's just not a good sign for them. And then he takes another step and he murders Harry Greenberg. And that's when the mob sort of starts to look at Siegel saying this guy might be a problem. And basically what it was Greenberg had threatened to pretty much become an informant and give up information about the mob to the cops, specifically about Murder Incorporated, and then the murder of there was some murders he was going to talk about and other things. And news ends up getting back to Louis Lepke, and Lepke is infuriated and he orders his death. And Siegel was told not to get involved in it, stay out of it, mind your business, because he was in control of too many rackets for the mob, and they did not want him to make himself really visible. And it was bad enough that he was fucking every Hollywood star in Los Angeles. It was bad enough he was hanging out with celebrities, bad enough that money was missing, and it creates a problem. But Siegel gets involved in the fucking murder anyway, along with Whitey Krakauer, Frankie Carbo, and Albert Tannenbaum, and they end up basically whacking Greenberg outside of his apartment. Ultimately, Tannenbaum would end up becoming a rat, and he would end up testifying against Siegel. And while awaiting trial, through his attorney, complained in the media about the jail food, about this, that, and the third, and then bragged about the jail people overseeing him were allowing hookers to come in. And so now it's not just the fact that money's missing and that he's making waves. Now it's that he's going public. And that is a huge, huge problem. He ends up making a spectacle of himself, and he starts to raise the eyebrows of those around him. Two others in that particular case end up getting killed, which created even more notoriety for the case. And while Siegel and Carbo ultimately would be acquitted of those charges, the damage was pretty much done not only to the mob, but to Benny Siegel too, because as all of this is happening, the press begins to dig into Benny Siegel's past, and they begin to associate him with his contacts into Murder, Inc., and so the mob is like, you got to leave California. And so what ends up happening in 1945 is Benny Siegel ends up out in Vegas. Now, originally when he goes out there, it was simply to control the construction rackets and control the unions that were working on the Boulder Dam. But while he's out there, he finds out that William Wilkerson had attempted to build the Flamingo, and it never sort of panned out. And so he has an idea, and he goes to Lansky with this idea. And he runs it by Lansky in a way of saying, I know this guy. He owns this place. We can make it into a casino. Gambling's legal. We could bring in prostitutes. We could make a lot of money. And Lansky's sort of going to mull it over for a bit. But right after he mentions this, he goes back to L.A., which he was warned not to do. The mob finds out and tells him, no, go back to fucking Vegas. We don't want you to California. And he once again sort of approaches this idea of the Flamingo. And the way that it happened was Benny Siegel would approach William Wilkerson, about this. And the problem is that because he owned the property and et cetera, they needed to form a business company, and they sort of did. The problem was the Flamingo was not totally finished, not ready, and they didn't have sort of the money for it at the time, which is why he wanted to bring Lansky into the fold. And not long after Wilkerson and Siegel agree on an arrangement to sort of be co-owners, he basically sticks a gun in his mouth and says, I own this place, you don't, get the fuck out of the country or else, which is exactly what Wilkerson did. Had Wilkerson turn around and dropped a dime, that would have created some problems. But Siegel basically explains everything to Lansky. They own the property, et cetera, but he needs the funding to do it right. And that it was a desert oasis of gambling, prostitution, narcotics, and it was a place that the Hollywood elite could go, relax, and gamble, and there was too much money to be made not to pass this up. And Lansky ends up agreeing with him, and he goes to Chicago to toss in half the cost, which is what Chicago does. And right away, after he gets the money, things start happening which are not going to benefit the mob. What originally was a $4 million contracting job becomes $6 million, then $7 million. Benny Siegel was spending money like crazy, and it didn't help that supplies were being price gouged and stolen and then sold back to Siegel at ridiculous profits. And then he puts Virginia Hill in charge of all that, which creates even more problems. But on the backdrop of that, the racing wire, which was no longer controlled in California, begins to sort of root its ugly head. Siegel would tell anybody who would listen to him he was the mob boss in Nevada. He was the mob boss in California, which causes problems with Jack Dragna, obviously, and some other people. And he would also steal away profits from the Transit America wire service, which Chicago then at that point had taken over. And so now he's stealing money from that. The bosses were pissed off about it, but they let it slide because they figured that while Siegel was sort of being belligerent, he was also a high earner for the mob, and they just wanted to focus on making money. So in December of 1946, the Flamingo finally opens. The problem is nobody showed up. The celebrities that Benny Siegel had promised would show up and spend a couple $100,000 didn't show. It also didn't help that the project wasn't finished. There were boxes, there was wood laying around. He just didn't finish the project itself. There were a lot of areas of the casino that just weren't finished. And Lansky, gets word that it wasn't, as far as construction goes, it wasn't ready. And so when they open, they take a fucking financial beating. They lose $300,000 very quickly, and the mob is really starting to focus now on what the fuck is going on. We sent this guy out here to do this kind of stuff, but let's, anger is rising. Guys want it taken care of. Guys want their fucking money. Chicago wants their money from the transatlantic wire service, but because Benny Siegel did have stature, they sort of agreed to give him one last chance to fucking make it right, and that is only because Meyer Lansky stuck up for him. So they would shut down, and then they'd reopen the Flamingo in 1947, and business was considered a success at that time, but the mob begins to have questions about the profits. They would make $350,000 a night, and then the next night they would show a loss of $200,000, and the mob begins to sort of suspect that Siegel was skimming off the top. And Lansky, through other people, was asked to sort of look into it and let Lucky Luciano know exactly what's happening. And Lansky does look into it. And what they find out was that Virginia Hill was heading to Switzerland and depositing money every week into a very strange Swiss bank account. The money in those accounts showed that Siegel was definitely skimming. There was no way around it. And Lansky ends up reporting this to Luciano, who pretty much says at this point, kill the motherfucker. We're done. We're absolutely fucking done. And so the mob kind of goes to Virginia Hill and sort of tells her straight up how it's going to be. You tell us what we want to know. You tell us what this money is for. That way they can back up what they're about to do, and you can either tell us or we're going to kill you. And they knew that she was pretty much trying to cover for Benny Siegel, but ultimately at the end of the day, she tells them sort of what they want to know. And you got to keep in mind that Virginia Hill got a lot of her wealth because she was a black widow, and she had gained a lot of wealth by husbands mysteriously disappearing and stuff like that. And she had gained the mob's trust because not only was she a spy for a lot of different gangsters, but she was the connection to the Mexican cartels, which the mob needed at the time. And it was pretty much simple. Get on board or we're going to fucking kill you. And she ends up getting on board. In fact, the night that Benny Siegel is killed, she mysteriously goes to Paris, France, of all fucking places. So on June 20th of 47, as Bugsy Siegel is sitting on the couch of Virginia Hill's house, gunfire rips through the windows, slams into Siegel's head and body. He was killed pretty much instantly, and the mob had enough of being fucking robbed. But Virginia Hill wouldn't get away really scot-free either, as years later she would be found dead of apparent drug overdose, which was ruled highly suspected to be a homicide. But as you see, Benny Siegel was killed because he was robbing the mob, and Lansky had long said that had the decision ultimately been up to him, Benny Siegel wouldn't have been killed, but that's just the reality. You rob, you're going to pay for it. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about Paul Castellano here, and I'm sure this is going to spark some controversy, but it is what it is. So Paul Castellano's sort of demise begins in 1970. Well, not his demise, but where he's really noted is in 1976 when Carlo Gambino dies. While many people suspected that Neil Dellacroce would be the logical successor to Gambino, Gambino chooses Castellano. And a lot of people ask me, why this, why that? And I think the main reason why Gambino chose Castellano is because I don't think he ever really trusted Dellacroce. And it goes back to the hit on Albert Anastasia. Dellacroce at the time was an Anastasia loyalist, and when Gambino moves on Anastasia, his real one true fear is that Neil Dellacroce would end up sort of wanting to get some retribution, and he would bring war to the newly formed Gambino crime family. While Dellacroce was not happy with how Gambino sort of acquired the throne, so to speak, he let it go. He always believed that the boss is the boss is the boss. And while he likely held his nose at how it was done and didn't like it, he just kept moving forward because at the end of the day, the crime family was more important to him than his own stature and his own desires. But likely, also the reason why Paul was chosen is because he was blood, and I think that Gambino wanted to keep the Gambino crime family a blood family-run business. And I think also the fact that Paul Castellano was a good businessman made a lot of sense to Gambino as well. So those are the reasons why I think he ultimately chose him. And one of the things that Castellano does is he immediately keeps Dellacroce as his underboss, and I think a lot of that is sort of derivative of trying to keep some others in the Gambino crime family who might not like the fact that he was named boss sort of happy and content. And he ends up putting Dellacroce in control of loan shark and bookmaking, extortion, and robbery. Unfortunately for Paul, though, this move sort of splits the Gambino crime family into factions. And likely it starts with this. Castellano orders the death of Nick Scabetta. Now, Scabetta was the brother-in-law of Salvatore Gravano. Castellano wanted Nick Scabetta dead because he was basically a fucking junkie and a drunk who had insulted the daughter of Georgie DeCicco, and out of respect, Castellano ends up sending Frankie DeCicco to Gravano and basically tells him, look, we're going to kill Nick Scabetta. That's the end of it. Gravano doesn't take the news well and sort of threatens to kill Paul Castellano before Nick Scabetta is ever hit, but eventually Frankie DeCicco talks him out of it and just says, look, this is what the boss wants. And so Gravano really has no choice at the point and just sort of says, all right, but says, I want to kill him myself. I want it to be handled the right way, and that's how that goes. But that probably started a lot of the seeds of the problem. Further into 1978, Castellano orders the death of Jimmy Ippolito and his son. Jimmy Ippolito had a beef with Nino Gaggi, and the beef was over territory. Gaggi had started to sort of encroach on his territory, and he gets a little bit pissed off, and he goes to Paul Castellano, and he says, look, I want Nino Gaggi's head on a fucking platter. And Paul really doesn't give him an answer one way or the other on what he's going to do. But instead what Paul does, and this starts a lot of shit too, is Paul runs right to Nino Gaggi and tells him that Jimmy Ippolito wants him dead. And in response, what does Nino Gaggi do? He orders Roy DeMeo to kill Ippolito and his son. Not just Jimmy Ippolito, but his son as well. And the move upset a lot of people in the Gambinos. And I think the argument they were making is that Carlo Gambino, while if he needed to take somebody out, would, but he wouldn't kill somebody's son. And they felt that, and I'm not speaking for him, but I think a lot of them felt that Castellano killing somebody's son was completely fucking out of line. I think a lot of people thought that Nino Gaggi was fucking out of line because if somebody, they're both captains, so it's not like one is higher than the other. And the fact that somebody was encroaching on somebody else's turf, maybe you should have backed down. And I think that they felt that Paul Castellano taking a personal side in an argument over territory was wrong, at least according to the street code. And like I said, the mere fact that they killed his son pissed off a lot of different guys. It's one thing to have a beef with somebody, but you don't kill their son. Regardless, I think a lot of guys felt that it was out of line. The same year, Castellano ends up forging an alliance with the Westies, which we all know is an Irish mob from Hell's Kitchen. And the reason was because the Westies were beginning to encroach on mob turf in Manhattan, and Paul wanted them sort of in the fold. He also wanted a hit team that couldn't be tied to the Gambino crime family, and it also, it also helped that the Westies were looking for some protection from other mob families, as the Lucchese's and the Colombos were beginning to go at them a little bit, and they wanted protection. So it really was a business move that ultimately is going to come back to haunt Castellano in a lot of different ways. They would end up meeting Castellano, and he basically tells them, look, you're going to stop murdering people at will, and if you need to murder somebody, you're going to get permission to do so. And Jimmy Coonan at the time, absolutely is like, oh, sure, I'm on board with that, but he really had no intention of keeping that promise. And Castellano ends up putting Roy DeMeo in charge of the Westies, making him sort of a liaison between the two groups. So in 1981, with all systems go, Castellano ends up sort of becoming a recluse. He has the captains meet him at his house in Staten Island on Sundays, and this is also when he started a horrid love affair with Gloria Olarte, who was his maid. And the reason why we're bringing up the affair is because it was a hotbed. It was a hotly debated and gossiped subject. The problem was that a lot of guys in the Gambinos, while they didn't care who Paul fucked, they took offense to the fact that he was doing this in his home while his wife was still living in the house, and he sort of throws it in his wife's face. They looked at it as a hugely disrespectful thing, and they felt that Paul Castellano should go get an apartment or a house, put the fucking maid there, but you don't do this in front of your wife. You don't respect your wife, and it was an issue that angered a lot of people. Now, was that the all to end all? Absolutely not. I think that's just another notch on the belt of people getting angry over something that ultimately didn't affect them at the end of the day, but it was just something else they could bitch about. So in 1983, Paul ends up ordering the death of Roy DeMeo, and the reason was very, very simple for this. Roy DeMeo had a problem with the Cubans, he had a problem with the federal government, and he had a problem within his own crew. Obviously, we know we talked about this earlier in the show, but Chris Rosenberg, who had worked for DeMeo got involved in narcotics trafficking, ends up killing the Cubans, and the Cubans were threatening to go to war with the Gambinos. As a result, Paul orders his death immediately, and the problem is the DeMeo crew gets so frantic about the Cubans is that a Hispanic vacuum cleaner salesman ends up knocking on Roy DeMeo's door. He's just selling fucking vacuums, and DeMeo is so creeped out that he ends up shooting. They get into like a car shootout that took place all through Brooklyn, firing from each car, and they end up killing the kid. And the problem is that the kid was fucking innocent. He did nothing wrong. It just so happened that he was Hispanic, and they were so hardwired and afraid of the Cubans at that time that they killed a very innocent kid. And Castellano hears this and goes fucking berserk. As a result, Rosenberg ends up getting killed. And at the time, also, the DeMeo crew was sort of killing at will, doing whatever they wanted to. And they also had their car theft ring, which was moving a lot of money and a lot of cars overseas. And that move directly ends up getting Paul Castellano indicted, which is why he orders the death of Roy DeMeo. A lot of people have said DeMeo was a snitch. There is no proof of that. It is very clear-cut why DeMeo was killed. So in August of that very year, Gene Gotti and Angelo Ruggiero get indicted for trafficking heroin. The basis for the indictment was wiretaps from Angelo Ruggiero's own big fucking mouth. Paul demanded that the transcripts of those wiretaps be handed over. Angelo Ruggiero refuses, and Paul ends up going to Neil Delacroce, and he says, look, I want the fucking transcripts of these tapes, and if you don't hand them over to me, we're going to have problems, and we're going to demote John Gotti because he's the head of this crew. I said that you guys couldn't sell drugs. You're doing it anyway. And so Delacroce realizes immediately things are going to be bad. And what he starts doing is stalling for time. And he tells John Gotti sort of what the ramifications are going to be of this. And considering the fact that Gotti was a captain, he had to have known that Gene Gotti and Angelo Ruggiero were selling drugs. He had to have known, and that was the thing that was concerning Paul. The fear also was that Paul would end up breaking up the crew and kill both Gene Gotti, John Gotti, and then Angelo Ruggiero as a result. The thought, pretty much infuriated Gotti no end, but the issue was that Paul Castellano already had the transcripts. He already knew exactly what Angelo Ruggiero had said. He had all the proof he needed to have to at least in terms of the streets, kill Ruggiero and the whole entire crew. They were all involved. They all knew about it. And I think that what he was really doing when he went to Dela Croce to order the transcripts, considering he already had them, was to test Dela Croce's merit, to test his loyalty, to sort of find out if Dela Croce was on Team Gambino or Team Gotti. And it just created a real issue because I don't think Paul Castellano really ever trusted Dela Croce. I think he carried that on from his cousin Carlo. And so basically it came down to, it seemed like the Gotti crew just did whatever the fuck they wanted, didn't listen, didn't want to take orders. And I think what transpires in a very short amount of time is Ruggiero knows what he did, Gotti knows they were selling drugs, and Gotti knows likely what the result of that is going to be. But lucky for Gotti, Paul gets indicted in 1984 for racketeering, murder, extortion, narcotics trafficking, and prostitution. Castellano would end up posting $2 million bail and gets released. Less than 6 months later, Castellano gets indicted again, once again for racketeering on the commission case. He ends up posting $3 million bail and gets out. 4.5 months later, Castellano gets indicted again for loan sharking and tax evasion. Then in late 1985, Vito Arena testifies that Castellano was the head of the DeMeo car theft ring and 5 murders. So between Gotti, Ruggiero, DeMeo, Paul's looking at, 200 years in prison. Behind the scenes, Gotti was complaining nonstop to Dela Croce about Castellano. Gotti felt that Castellano was a snob, wasn't a true gangster, wasn't a tough guy. And Dela Croce would remind Gotti, at least if you listen to the wiretaps, he would remind Gotti and Ruggiero that the boss is the boss is the boss. The results of what Castellano was infuriated by are your stupid decisions. Whether or not Dela Croce agreed on what Paul wanted to do or not is subject to interpretation. Gotti had the right to earn like everybody else, but Dela Croce was going to stand by the boss. That's just the bottom line. And so it sort of put Gotti into a vice grip where he really just had to kind of sit it out and wait and see what was going to happen. I think Gotti knew as long as Dela Croce was alive, Castellano probably wasn't going to push too hard. But, we're never going to know because Dela Croce ends up dying on December 2nd of 1985. And what Castellano does is he's under indictment for 3, 4, 5 cases at the time, and he doesn't go to the wake or the funeral of Dela Croce, which Gotti uses as some sort of slight against Dela Croce. He uses it as a personal issue. But in all reality is Castellano wanted to avoid being seen in fucking public with other gangsters. He already had all of these cases going against him. I don't think it was a slight. That's the excuse Gotti, I think, was going to use, and he would use it to his advantage well. But I think ultimately it wasn't a sign of disrespect. It was simply, I'm under fucking indictment in 4 cases. I'm staying my ass home. And I don't think a lot of people would disagree with that. So, not only had Castellano slighted Dela Croce in Gotti's eyes, but then Castellano goes and names Tommy Bellotti as his new underboss. Now, Bellotti, by many accounts, was a big loan shark and somebody who Gotti felt was not suited to be underboss material in any sense of the imagination. Gotti, it's been said that Gotti thought he lacked diplomatic and social skills for the job. And also, at the time, Paul had put it out on the streets that the Gotti crew was effectively done. He was going to break them up or he was going to kill people, and nobody really knew for sure what was going to happen. So Bellotti in his past had been a hitman, a loan shark, and was also very tight with Paul Castellano, was his driver and his bodyguard. And he was also part owner in Scaramix, which was the cement and construction company based in Staten Island that him and Paul owned. And Bellotti also was largely responsible for controlling Local 638 of the Steam Pipers and Steam Fitters Union. So it's not like Tommy Bellotti was a nobody. I think that a lot of that gets sort of lost in translation when you talk about this topic. So Gotti understands that time is likely running out for him, and he sort of sends out feelers through Frankie DeCicco to see, who might be on board with taking out Paul. Gotti knew he needed the support of various captains in order to create sort of a hostile takeover. Gotti ends up getting word that this one's behind him, that one's behind him, and he immediately greenlights the murder. Paul knew that there were problems, but I don't think Paul thought that Gotti would take him out, and he ends up getting lured to Sparks Steakhouse on December 16th of 1985 on the premise that he needed to go and sit and talk with people about cooling some of the hostilities within the family. And as he and Tommy Bellotti pull up, they're met with a hail of gunfire. It's rumored that Angelo Ruggiero, Anthony Rampino, Anthony Pizzonia took part in the hit. And it's also long been alleged that Johnny Carneglia is the one who actually ended Paul Castellano's life by shooting him in the fucking head. And so Castellano gets killed, not because he's a horrible boss, but because Gotti wanted to take over and feared that Paul Castellano was either going to break up his crew or kill him. All the excuses that we've heard throughout the years that Paul Castellano might rat, he wasn't a true gangster, all of these sort of things really don't hold any face value. All the opinions that, Paul was just a businessman, not a gangster, none of it's merited. Gotti just did what Gotti wanted. And the truth is, he probably didn't need to, because ultimately Castellano would have gone away for the rest of his life. But I think that the problem Gotti saw was that Paul might continue to keep control of the family from prison, might still move on Gotti. And I think Gotti probably thought he didn't have enough backing or strength with some other people, so he had to jump. Kill or be killed. The hit was not sanctioned. It was against everything that the mob stood for. However, history repeats itself. Angelo Bruno, Masseria, Maranzano, it's the same derivative. It's the same thing. So, while it's the same sort of action and history repeating itself, Gotti's way was a little bit different. Gotti was not a higher up. He wasn't someone with a ton of clout at the time. And the move was strictly to take over, to save himself. And in the streets, like I said, it's kill or be killed. So on that front, I totally understand why he did it. The hit itself would transform the Gambinos into one of the more deadly and powerful crime families, but ultimately, at the same time that he sort of becomes the boss, it also leads to the downfall of the Gambino crime family itself because of the way he directed the Gambinos. So while he did everything he could to take over, ultimately at the end of the day, when you look at the positives and negatives, it was more detrimental to the Gambinos than it was positive. Okay. All right. So the last guy we're going to talk about for today is Joe Colombo. We have talked about him a lot of times on this show, but it's worth noting. All right. Joe Colombo came up in the Profaci crime family. Joe's father was actually a captain himself, and ultimately Joe would become a capo himself, surviving the first Colombo War. Specifically, Joey Gallo would end up kidnapping members of the Profaci crime family. And we have to understand what really started that beef, because not only would the Profaci beef be a problem, but it would bleed into Colombo when he took over. So Joe Profaci, let's get it out, was a greedy fuck. There's no other way to say it. Other mob bosses, took a cut of profits, but not nearly as bad as Profaci did. I mean, this guy was so fucking greedy, he would charge his guys $25 monthly fee on top of the 25% of their rackets. Now, if we're going to look at something in comparison, most mob bosses took between 10 to 12 to 15%, depending on who they were. Guys weren't starving by any stretch under Profaci, but the problem was that Profaci owned a $100 million olive oil and tomato paste company, and guys were a little bit pissed off at the sheer greed that he had. Frankie Shots Abitamarco, who was a high-earning and deadly capo for the Profaci crime family, sort of begins to have problems with Profaci and his greed. Abitamarco controlled the numbers racket, which is pulling in $2.5 million a year, officially $7,000 a day in Red Hook, Brooklyn alone. And this is more of an example of how Profaci operated. So not only is he like getting a cut of the $2.5 million fucking dollars, he's asking for 25 on top of it. And Abbott DeMarco reaches the point where he's like, fuck this shit. This guy's making $100 million on this, that, and the third, and he's pinching the quarter till the fucking eagle screams. I'm not paying him a fucking dime. He can go fuck himself. And what he does is he sort of aligns himself with Joey Gallo and his Garfield crew, thinking that's going to protect him. And what ends up happening is the money that he ends up owing Joe Profaci begins to accumulate. And Profaci's had it. He goes to Joey Gallo and he says, look, I want you to kill Abbott DeMarco, and in return for killing this prick, I'm going to give you his numbers racket. Gallo sort of kind of looks at it and says, all right, why not? So Gallo subcontracts the murder, and basically that's what happens. Abbott DeMarco gets whacked. But Profaci, after this happens, is a little more pissed because, first of all, Profaci has ordered Joey Gallo to kill Abbott DeMarco. That's one thing. Then he's going to give him the rackets. Fine. Understandable. Profaci is so fucking paranoid, he then asked Joey Gallo to whack Abbott DeMarco's son, Anthony. Gallo absolutely wants nothing to do with it. Gallo was a murderer. He had no problem murdering, but he felt that's way out of fucking line. You don't kill somebody's son. And because Profaci doesn't get what he wants, he tells Gallo to go fuck himself and refuses to give Gallo what he said he would, which was Abbott DeMarco's rackets. And I think looking at it, I don't think Profaci was ever going to give Joey Gallo Abbott DeMarco's rackets. I don't think he had any intention of doing it. He just wanted to sort of subterfuge him into doing what he wanted to do, and that's what leads to the first Colombo War. They would war for 3 years. They would trade shots, trade bodies. Gallo ends up getting sentenced to prison for murder, and in 1962, Profaci ends up dying of cancer, which elevated Joe Magliocco as the official boss of the Profaci crime family. Both sides would continue to war, and in late of 1963, Joe Bonanno makes the biggest mistake of his life, which ultimately leads to some serious ramifications. Now, Joe Bonanno at the time felt that he was better than the mob. He felt he was above everybody. He certainly didn't like Frank DeSimone. He didn't like Carlo Gambino, and he did not like Tommy Lucchese, and really didn't like Stefano Magaddino. And his plan was basic. If they whacked the whole entire commission, he could easily take over, become boss of bosses, and bring in Joe Magliocco as his number 2. So you're not going to have 5 families at that point. You're going to have 1. The motivation was greed. That's totally what this is about. Magliocco went along with it because he obviously wanted to be higher up than he was, and he was also pissed off the commission because they had refused to give him a seat on the commission, and so he says, fuck it, I'm all in. So Bonanno basically tells Magliocco, go ahead, hire the hit team, and kill Gambino and Lucchese first, and we'll work on the rest. Magliocco goes to his top hitman. Who's his top hitman? Joe Colombo. And so he tells Joe Colombo what he wants, and Joe Colombo, rather than go along with it, goes right to Carlo Gambino and Lucchese and tells them exactly what Magliocco had come and told him. So now the commission knows about the plot to assassinate them, and they're really not happy about it. So what they end up doing is they end up contacting Magliocco and Joe Bonanno immediately. They say, you have got to come in and talk to us. And the commission knew that Magliocco likely wasn't acting alone because he didn't have anywhere near the power enough to pull everybody involved in it. And Magliocco ends up going to this meeting despite the fear that he's going to be killed. He ends up sitting down and he says, look, this is what happened. I agreed to do this, but it was Joe Bonanno who wanted this done. And so the commission, rather than killing him, pretty much just says, okay, here's the deal. You're going to give us $50,000 and you're no longer in the mafia, and that's the end of it. Bonanno, on the other hand, instead of facing what he was trying to do like a bitch, and I'm saying it like a bitch, took off and ran to Montreal, then further exacerbates that issue by faking his own kidnapping. And as a reward for killing Gambino and Tommy Lucchese about the plot, basically Magliocco is done, and everything else sort of sinks in, and they just hand it to Joe Colombo. They say, you know what, because you looked out for us, we are going to make you boss of the Profaci crime family, and you can go ahead and rename it after yourself, which is exactly what he does. Joe Colombo was the first non-Italy-born boss ever in American Cosa Nostra. He was also at the time the youngest boss ever at 41 years of age. So before too long, Joey Gallo ends up getting out of prison, and he meets with Joe Colombo. He didn't really have a whole lot of regard for Joe Colombo, and it was vice versa, but he does it because that's the right thing to do. Colombo on the back end had sort of started hearing things that Joey Gallo had made inroads with African-American drug dealers and was going to bring in African-Americans into his crew, which didn't sit well with Colombo. You can call it racist if you want, but Colombo believed you don't bring in outsiders that aren't Italian into this thing. And Gallo, on his end of things, felt like Joe Colombo owed him. And basically Colombo gives him $1,000 and says, hey, best of luck to you. And it ends up infuriating Gallo to no end. And that would effectively and efficiently start the Second Colombo War. As that begins, Joe Colombo establishes the Italian-American Civil Rights League. By its definition, it was a political advocacy group meant to defend Italian-Americans and correct cultural slights against Italians. The problem is that Joe Colombo uses it as a crutch for his personal war against the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He accused the FBI of harassing. To stand outside of FBI offices in New York. For weeks on end, they would demonstrate, call names, etc., etc. And Carlo Gambino starts to see this, and he doesn't like it. Other bosses began to complain to Gambino as well. They end up sending word to Colombo to realize who you are, what you do, to back it the fuck off. We understand what you're trying to do, but you need to shut it down a little bit. And Colombo pretty much refuses at that point. I don't know if it was an ultimate go fuck yourself move, or whether it was just a I'll tone it down. I don't know specifically what that was. Then Colombo begins to attack major American brands like Ford, Alka-Seltzer, and he was calling them anti-Italian. He would end up attacking John Mitchell, who at the time was the U.S. Attorney for the United States government. He would claim that Mitchell needed to stop using words like mafia and mob. And while on its toes, defending Italian-American rights, there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're a fucking mob boss, maybe you ought to shut the fuck up. I mean, maybe it's just me, but he wouldn't. Gambino further starts to become a little bit more upset about what is going on because it's getting a lot of press. It's not good. And he ends up sending word to Joey Gallo to keep fucking with Colombo. They were still warring, and he kept telling Joey Gallo, don't back off, keep pestering him, keep poking him. Then what Carlo does is he warns Colombo one last fucking time. He tells him, put it in a notch, stop your shit, let it go. Because Carlo figured if Gallo could get to Colombo and trip him up, then maybe the feds will come in and take Colombo off the streets, and that'll end this fucking problem. Gambino was trying to do everything he could not to kill him. But unfortunately, as we see in history, it always repeats itself, and what Colombo does next is what gets him killed. He doesn't listen to Gambino, and he announces a demonstration which was called the Italian Unity Day. It was going to take place 3 days in Columbus Circle in New York City to rally against the alleged federal persecution of Italians everywhere. At this point, the bosses get together, and they've had it. He won't stop. He's got to go. And it was as simple as that. So at this rally on June 28th of 1971, Joe Colombo gets shot 3 times, allegedly, by Jerome Johnson, once in the head, twice in the chest. Johnson would be killed almost immediately by Colombo's bodyguards. Now, while Colombo would survive, he would actually die 7 years later, and he never really regained consciousness. The Johnson, it's been said, was hired by none other than Joey Gallo at the behest of Carlo Gambino. Gambino played Gallo like a fiddle, and less than a year later, Gambino would react and have Joey Gallo killed as well. Now, there are going to be some people that are going to hotly contest what I just told you. Can I prove it? No. But I think that that's probably the most realistic thing that happened. Gambino was the guy who had all the power and all the juice in those days. And you've got to think about it. No matter what you think about Joe Colombo at the end of the day, He was a bit of a snake in the grass. We can argue if he did the right thing by running to Lucchese and Gambino, saving their life. I mean, I don't think he did it because he had any compunction about, he gave a shit about Gambino. I think he saw the writing on the wall that if he did this, he could get elevated, and I think he felt that that was the best thing to do. But the thing is how many times have we seen a boss or somebody of a higher up sort of make a mockery out of... It's like you're a boss of a crime family. What the fuck are you doing holding rallies? Not only is the FBI going to start watching, but then you're going to attack the FBI in these huge fucking rallies. That's not good for business, especially when you are who you are. And I think that Joe Colombo probably felt, obviously I didn't know him, but I think he probably felt that the more pressure that he applied to the federal government, that they would back down, but he forgot who he was. And he forgot that those around him weren't going to tolerate it. And that's exactly why Colombo was killed, because he wouldn't stop. How many times have we seen this? Giancana, same sort of deal there. Tony Spilotro killed various same reasons. Guys are warned, stop this, stop that, and they do it anyway. And the minute that you begin to think that you are bigger than this thing that you join, that's when you're going to get your brains fucking splattered all over the fucking pavement. It's a shame he paid with his life for that. But at the end of the day, you are who you are. Knock it the fuck off. It just brought too much heat and too much notoriety to them. So, with all that being said, that's what we're going to do for this week. We're going to end it right here. We'll be back next week. We're going to cover 4 more mob hits, and we're going to talk a biography about somebody else, and we're going to do another Q&A. So, if you're wondering how to participate in the Q&A, it's very simple. Go to Facebook, type in Mob Talk Radio, and you'll see me post usually Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesdays. It'll say Q&A and go. You can submit your question there, or you can direct message me. We still have art that's on sale. We still have t-shirts that are selling like crazy, coffee mugs. I'll provide all the links in this episode. In the meantime, I hope everybody is safe. Stay off the fucking streets. It's not worth getting the fucking diarrhea plague. I've always said, if I'm walking, I'm talking, I'm breathing, I'm all right, I can deal with whatever. But the whole idea of like my eye sockets, my ears, and my ass bleeding all at once while I'm puking and coughing just doesn't sound very appealing to me. You know what I mean? It's like Ron Previty sitting on my fucking chest and my eyes exploding out of my fucking eye sockets because of his fucking weight. So, all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the show, and we will be back next week with an all-new show. In the meantime, just stay the fuck off the streets. Seriously, just break out the fucking blow torches, the hazmat suits, and just fucking do your own thing. It's not worth getting sick. Everybody thinks running down to the corner to get cigarettes or whatever this or that is the most important thing in life, but it's not. The most important thing, I don't give a fuck what the government says, I don't give a fuck what anybody says, is that you live. And that you stay healthy through this. Some people are saying this fucking virus and this plague is a fucking joke and it's not real. Well, tell that to Italy. Tell that to the Italians who are dying. Like 500 a day, 600 a day, some crazy shit. So, while the virus may not affect you in a kind of way that could kill you or to hurt you, the effects are different than in everybody. The last time I checked, bullets don't discriminate, neither do fucking viruses, neither does fucking cancer. So do the smart thing, stay off the streets, binge watch my show. Well, you can't watch my show. Listen to my stupid shit, watch TV, find something to keep yourself busy, because if you don't, you're going to end up doing what everybody else does, and it creates like a fucking rattlesnake mentality. Just enjoy your family. That's what this is about, and hopefully this shit will be over with sooner rather than later. Because I don't know about anybody else, but I'm tired of looking at the same 8 fucking walls. You know what I mean? So I try to fill your head with good things, keep it busy, stay off the fucking streets. I cannot say that shit fucking enough. That's it. So have a good week. Stay safe. If anybody needs anything that I know personally, let me know and I'll take care of whatever I can for you. So, all right. Have a great week, everybody.